Sir, you're charged with especially aggravated kidnapping. You're also charged with aggravated assault, and you're charged with theft of a firearm worth less than $2,500.
You're talking about stuff that is not relevant.
Hello and welcome to the Court of Public Opinion. I am the Recovery Addict, and boy do I have a case for you today.
Why is the dog chewing on this guy?
I think they have got the wrong guy there.
Got the wrong guy. The dog was biting him.
He roughened him up quite a bit. There's a lawsuit.
Is the next search on February 28, 2020, 7:44 p.m. How, does the FBI find people? The people is misspelled P-E-O-O-P-L-E. Did the defendant find out how the FBI finds people in this case? Oh, she found out.
Okay, so I completely ruined the intro because I had the wrong button pushed and I thought it wasn't working, but then it was, but I couldn't see it. So sorry about that. Oh, it's a rough morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the Court of Public Opinion. I am the Recovery Addict. Thank you so much for being here today. A little bit of flashing there for you this morning, so I apologize that I had the wrong button selected. Oh, it's morning. Hope you're all doing great. Happy Tuesday to you. Tomorrow we're halfway there, right? We have all the cameras this morning. I just had the wrong button selected. I had my switcher showing me what I had like an isolated view instead of what was actually live. So when I switched to live and it didn't change, I'm like, no, it's not working. But it was. So, alrighty. Either way, we are ready to. We're gonna have to give you your pink slip now so you can detail. Yes, it's gonna happen here any minute now. I expect the big boss to come in and say, look, it was a good try. You know, a good effort, A for effort, but I think maybe your talents are probably best used somewhere else. But before we do that, though, we need to first of all recognize Betsy Connor. Betsy, where are you, Betsy? There you are, Betsy. It is so wonderful to have you here. So wonderful to have you here, first in chat, being here, saying good morning, saying hi. If you don't know, and Betsy, it's possible you might not know. You might not know that the first person in chat every day is is awarded a prize. It's awarded a prize that's sort of unique, that you can only get by being first in chat, and that is we award the internet to you. So everything IP related is now yours. Congratulations and our condolences, because in addition to owning it, you also have to maintain it. And I realize that's a big job nowadays, but it's your job now. So if you could please make sure the internet stays running today, Betsy, we would appreciate it. Congratulations being first in chat. I think you're a first-time offender when it comes to this offense of being first in chat, Betsy, but we love you for it. So thank you very much. Betsy's like, got it. No problem. Just ready to go. Betsy, that's awesome. Thank you very much. Good to have you here. And now you're eligible to purchase for the low cost of 50 cents. Your own internet ownership certificate, which is available on our store if you know how to search for it, because it's hard to find. Let's see, Sharon says buffer. Denise Feldman Ersland, grandson Axel, is 1 today. Holly Mack, grandson Damien, is 2 today. And Krista's son William is 8 today. A bit under the normal demographic of our viewers, but wow, we will include Axel, Damien, and William on the birthday song. I will say, does it sound like my voice is just a little bit lower than normal? Is that a thing? My kids have had this nasty cough for like 4 days, and now I've got this little tickle, right? Just like it might be trying to come my direction, but I'm not sure yet. Is first in chat before you sign on? Basil says, first in chat is as soon as the window opens up. And honestly, people are appearing first in chat, and I'm creating the window, right? I'm creating the thumbnail, but the first people in chat are showing up before I can get into my own little. And I've got 2 computers, so I build it on one and open it on the other, and there's already somebody in chat. So I don't know how you guys do it. I think it's time travel or magic or something like that, but it's quite impressive. All right, we are. Okay, all right. We're I don't know what we're doing over there, but we'll just keep an eye on that. All right. let's see. So we have to sing Happy Birthday. I just feel like I'm going to lose my voice here. And unfortunately for whoever has a birthday, what that will appear like is the song will begin as it should. And then it will drastically deviate from any version of Happy Birthday you've ever heard. And it will suddenly become from one of the highlights of the day to probably the low point. And my voice will crack and it will sound awful. And I'll apologize profusely, but there's nothing I can do about it at that point. It's done. And yes, I've been taking those vitamin C. I call them candies, but they come in like a cough drop pouch. It's like the vitamin C. What are they? What are these? When they have vitamin C in them, and it's like citrus flavored and everything. I've been eating them like they're candy. There it is. There's just a. All right. We'll give it a go. Is there anyone else that we need to Ricola? That was awful, Jen. Yes, but Ricola, we need maybe some of those instead. Switch to the Leonard Cohen voice. We're going to try to sing. We'll be the judge. I even on the most generous day, I think you're going to judge that there's probably something wrong with my voice today. We'll sing anyway. Luckily, it's to the kids. Oh, wait. Sharon McDonald's happy anniversary, by the way. 42nd anniversary. That is huge. Any other birthdays this morning? Just the 3 kids? Let's see. Where are our 3 kids' names? There they are. So we've got Axel, Damien, and William. We will sing to them, and anyone else who has a birthday, consider yourself sung to. Let's see. I don't see any others. Oh, wait. Hang on. I do see more. It's going to be crazy. They're coming in waves. So we have Axel, Damien, and William. And then we also have twins, Zara and Carly. Axel, Damien, William, Zara, and Carly. Okay, we can do this. This needs to be a sing-along today, guys. I need your help more than ever. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Axel, Damien, William, Zara, and Carly. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, all you little people. I said little people because I think all the birthdays that we have this morning are youngins, are kids. The light of our eyes, the light of our lives, the future is all celebrating their birthday today, apparently. So wonderful for that. Where are we at in this trial? What is the estimated timeline? Susan, that's a great question. Probably for answering when the birthday song is not singing in the background. So we'll turn that one down. Congratulations to all who have birthdays. If you do choose to celebrate here, first of all, I have to ask, why are you not in school? And second of all, your parents have good choice, good taste. All right. A quick one here before I answer that question for Susan. Mike W., welcome to the gallery. Good to have you here as a new member. Look, that blue courthouse means that you've been a new member before. It's great to have you back. Why are we in the estimated timeline? Well, this is the 20th time we have started a live stream with this case. So it's been a bit, right? We are almost halfway through. And by halfway through, I mean at the point where the plaintiff, who we don't have a prosecution in this case because it's not a criminal trial, but the plaintiff is almost done. They're supposed to rest their case by Friday. Now, each side has, I think, 50 hours allotted to them. And once their time's up, and they can't do anything, including crossing witnesses, if their time is up. So they have to stay within that threshold. And it's going to be interesting. It's going to get a little crowded. You're going to see people start to rush a little bit the presentations and the questions, and they're going to be weighing time against everything they decide to do from here on out. And you'll hear that come up several times. Let's see. Weather Watch just gifted 5 memberships. Good to have you back, Weather Watch. Hope your weekend was fantastic. Good to have you. I know you were here yesterday, but you were also sort of not here yesterday. So, Krista also gifted 5 memberships. Wow, the memberships are flowing this morning. Hopefully you have your setting turned on so you can receive those. Shaky Grounds, Patches, Novel Leo 22, Sue Magic, Tish Fish, Lindsay Lewis, Christina Bell, Trish R, Lena H, and Amanda E. All gifted memberships by the Weather Watch and Krista. Congratulations, and thank you very much for the gifters there. That was very generous of you. Okay, so that's where we are. How much time do they get? They get 50 hours each, and of that time, anytime they spend directly questioning a witness counts against that time. Anytime they spend crossing a witness counts against that time. And half of the time that is spent with jury questions counts against their time. So it's split amongst the two. There is other court time that is not counted against them. And so, you'd think we could get to 50 hours pretty quickly with a 40-hour work week, but not so. It actually takes a little while to get there. Rudy Patootie, thank you very much for coming in with a gifted membership as well. That is very kind of you. And somebody named Mimi YT is probably very grateful because they just received that gift. Thank you, Rudy Patootie. Appreciate that. Okay, so I'm worried the plaintiff's going to run out of time. Yes. This is a real worry because if they run out of time, I think that affects their rebuttal. I don't know if a sanction, and I was thinking about this yesterday, I'm not sure if a sanction can deduct time from their presentation, but that's something I wanted to think about and get an answer on. And if they get sanctioned, that's going to be interesting. 80s Music Man says, hey, YouTube, over here. That's awesome. 80s, we see you there. Hopefully YouTube will find you as well. If they run out of time, they don't get to cross a witness. Defense will get to put on a witness, and there's no cross from the plaintiff. And then defense puts on the next witness. It's really bizarre. It's crazy. How many hours are they at? I think they're getting close to 30, or just over 30 maybe. I forgot. What were they at yesterday? Rob was saying last night he wasn't worried about time. I know Mr. Anderson's worried about time. He's brought it up several times. So Rob probably has more experience with this, but I'm not sure. Mr. Anderson probably has a better idea what all he wants to get into the case and realizes what, he's now at a point where he has to limit what he admits. All right. There are a lot of gifted memberships that are expiring in the next couple days. A ton. Just so you know, we had amazing gifters during a period about a month ago that probably close to, 500 of you have a gifted membership that is going to be expiring. So I apologize. I can't make it stretch out any longer. All right, the time limit's weird. How is that equal fair? It's how they just do it. It's bizarre. It's a little crazy, but it's how it works. Let's see. Let's go right here. See if we can hear anything from the courtroom yet. Just got some audio in.
This is case number 2008.
Perfect timing.
Actually, let me start
Scratch that.
the Zoom feed here. There we go. This is case number 2018 CA 5321. Starting with the plaintiffs, let's take appearances, please.
Greg Anderson, Nick Whitney on behalf of the plaintiffs.
Ethan Shapiro, Howard Hunter, Pat Quarles, David Hughes. On behalf of the defense, our client representative is Dr. Jenny Dolan.
Your Honor, because of the testimony this morning, the Kowalskis will not be here. Also, Jack Kowalski has a bit of a cold, and I didn't want to take chances.
And what do we need to accomplish? I know that I've been handed another exhibit list, so
They cannot agree on exhibits.
address that.
And we also had a Williams Rule motion, Your Honor, for similar fact evidence before the court. We'd like to take up at some point.
Was this recently filed?
Yes, Your Honor. Well, we say that. It shows that it's filed. He filed last night.
It hasn't been docketed with the clerk. I don't have
I've
it.
had an opportunity to review this. It's not that I'm unprepared to handle that before.
I just haven't seen it. I haven't had a chance to lay eyeballs on it yet.
Filed pretty late last
Let's address exhibits, please.
All right, Your Honor, beginning with 2041. Looks like the defense objects to 2 pages within. Can you pull up 118 and 119, please?
Judge, our objection is that this is a memo that Dr. Kirkpatrick puts in his medical records, and simply the fact that he decided to do a memo to himself about a conference call that he had, that he was thinking about the case and Maya, doesn't make it a medical record. It's hearsay.
It's in the medical record?
And it's all about the investigation, his conversations with Dr. Smith, has nothing to do about his care and treatment of Maya.
I'm not a cat.
Mostly what he said.
Linus?
8033 or 4, primarily 4, he documented in his file a conversation with another physician in which he outlined the concerns with the actual diagnosis of Munchausen by proxy, and Dr. Smith told him what her findings were, and he told Dr. Smith there were multiple objective findings to support the diagnosis of complex regional pain syndrome, including abnormal pain thresholds as well as severe dystonia. He goes in detail as to his discussion with another physician about a patient, which clearly falls within 8034. And as to the other statements about warning Dr. Smith, I think that would fall under 3. To the extent it's not in 4, that would fall under subpart 3, as it comments on an intent or mostly planned motive in terms of how Maya was going to be treated by Dr. Smith and thus responded to by Dr. Kirkpatrick.
Let's break this down. Statements for purposes of medical diagnosis or treatment, 803, paren 4.
Dennis, thank you very much. 6 months.
By a
That's
person
awesome. Thank you.
seeking the diagnosis or treatment. So how would Dr. Smith qualify as such a declarant?
Well, she was diagnosing Maya. Now, not in your usual, I admit, clinical setting of in her office, but there's absolutely no question based on the report that she filed, which was in the Johns Hopkins medical files. She completed a single-space, some 50-something page report, which was placed in the Johns Hopkins medical file as part of their medical records, in which she made objective findings based on not only the history, but supposedly observations made by the doctors there at the time of the October 7th admission. And although she was more or less assigned to Maya Kowalski, or I guess all the Kowalskis, does not take away from the fact that her deductions, medical reasoning, documentation of what she believed to be the fact became part of the Johns Hopkins medical record.
Judge, it doesn't apply. Doctor, neither of them are the patient. It's hearsay. It's him.
Well, it's hearsay. It's just whether there's an exception.
Okay, understood.
Yeah. And I just don't see how 90.803 paren 4 for purposes of medical diagnosis or treatment would apply, because Dr. Smith is not seeking the diagnosis or treatment.
Well, she's receiving information towards diagnosis and treating. I don't know that 8034 is so narrow as to make it only statements made outwardly, but information obviously received in from other physicians, which this definitely is.
Well, I don't see it under sub 4. You said also sub 3?
Yes. This is describing the intent, plan, or motive as to Dr. Smith and Dr. Kirkpatrick's concerns there, and how he believed Dr. Smith was taking this farther than it should, considering the medical evidence, and suggested that Dr. Smith had ulterior concerns there, and he cautioned Dr. Smith about accusing a family member, which was the plan or intent of Dr. Smith, and his plan or intent was to oppose that.
But why is that relevant for this case? That's a Chapter 39 dependency court issue.
I think that, well, it may well be, but it is also as to the ability of the defense to prove or disprove the existence of Munchausen by proxy. And the most important thing about this, Judge, is it goes to notice to the hospital through its agent or representative, or as they put it, the leader of their child abuse team, of the fact that she was making a misdiagnosis and a knowing misdiagnosis, and this information was communicated to them through Dr. Kirkpatrick to Dr. Smith. And so the notice issue is critical in this case, because obviously we want to demonstrate that there was something more than simply there was a motive to Kathy Beatty's conduct, which is a bit more than simply trying to help this child, of which we question whether there was ever any motive that way. And so in this instance, it may well have effect under Chapter 39, but it certainly has effect in terms of the notice to the hospital as to whether their diagnosis, which is the subject of our medical malpractice claim, was correct. And they're continuing to assert that even after an expert in the area tells them.
We've got to start. Y'all are running out of time.
Yes,
so we can't keep on going on and on and on and on. Let's try to be more concise.
Judge, it's right at the beginning of her investigation. It's Chapter 39.
Can I tell you a concern I have and see how you respond to it?
Yes.
I have some warmness to the notice contention. For instance, if, and there's going to be a jury question as to whether Dr. Smith was an apparent agent of the hospital. And so if Dr. Kirkpatrick is telling Dr. Sally Smith that, hey, touching a child with CRPS, you can expect that type of reaction, and the harm that could be done by continuing with it, that seems to possibly be relevant and not part of the Chapter 39 immunity.
Well, Judge, I think that when you look at the statements, however, first of all, it's him recording what he said to Dr. Smith. And he's warning her about going forward with the investigation. He's not saying this is going to cause harm to Maya. He's saying that you're wrong. Here's why I think you're wrong, Dr. Smith. But there's nothing about, it's all about the investigation. It's October 11th is when she's starting her investigation. I don't think you can separate the two.
Here's my thought on this, pages 118 and 119 of Exhibit 2041. I don't, almost everything in this is not admissible under 90.803 paren 3 or 4. So I just don't see how you could redact this in such a way for it to be meaningful But you're having Dr. Kirkpatrick live, right?
We are having Dr. Kirkpatrick live.
So-
Would like to use the information with Dr. Brewerton.
Well,
Dr. Brewerton.
this document, which is pages 118 and 119 of Exhibit 241, I'm going to exclude. But perhaps there might be a question or two that you can ask Dr. Kirkpatrick, maybe. I think it's just going to have to depend on how you word it and what you're physically asking. But nothing about the Chapter 39, the dependency court proceeding, that it's not relevant. But maybe on your notice issue, there could be some relevance to this lawsuit. So can 2041, except for those 2 pages, come in at this time?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the court receives Exhibit 2041 in its entirety, except for pages 118 and 119, which will not come in.
We're going to teleport back in time just briefly.
Judge, may we give a shot at redacting this? That's my first question.
You can always try, but yes, you can try, but from a timing perspective,
Yeah.
I was thinking about this last night. You're starting to run out of time.
And we're starting to jam in as many people as we can.
So
you
just have to be as streamlined as you possibly can.
We're trying, Judge. The second question is that Dr. Brewerton, our psychiatric expert who's expected to testify first, of course reviewed Dr. Kirkpatrick's file, and this was in it. May I ask him questions then about notice to Dr. Smith provided by Dr. Kirkpatrick as part of his analysis of the diagnosis and treatment of Maya Kowalski?
I don't know how that connects. Dr. Brewerton is here to give his psychiatric opinions regarding Maya Kowalski. How does the, quote, notice to Dr. Smith connect to those opinions other than an attempt to get around the fact that they're not?
It sounds like an uphill battle to me, Mr. Anderson.
But may I don't want to add any more to it, Judge, if the court's not... I don't want to waste the court's time on something.
It's not wasting the court's time. It's just I don't think you're going to be successful there. If you want to spend your time doing that, that's fine. It's just I don't think you're going to be successful there.
I only had one question of him as to whether he saw that Dr. Smith had been provided notice by one of the treating physicians that the accusation, diagnosis, if you will, of Munchausen by proxy was incorrect.
Well, we're 15 minutes in. We've dealt with one exhibit. So what's next?
2118 are the handwritten notes of Dr. Sally Smith.
Judge, let me be perfectly frank with the court. There's like 200 pages. I didn't look at it last night because I'm like, what do you really want in? They're handwritten notes, there's articles, If
there are specific objections, we could look at them, but we don't have specific objections.
Okay.
How many pages are you trying to put in?
All of them, except the articles, because they're all part of Sally Smith's medical file.
Okay, Judge.
And again, as the court has pointed out, she's an apparent agent, or there's a question about apparent agency in this case.
Judge, again, to be frank, because there were over 200 pages, it was late last night, I didn't look at all of them because now they said all of them except the articles. Well, I was waiting for them to tell me what pages you want in.
All right, we can be more specific at the moment with the reservation to come back. We would like to look at 36, 37. I'll go one at a time. Here's 36, 37.
That's fine. 2118. Is that on? I'm sorry.
No, I'm just giving the court a chance to look at them.
So 36 and 37 in Exhibit 2118 are Dr. Smith's notes from 2 telephone calls with Dr. Kirkpatrick, or whether it's telephone or in person, I don't know, but.
It was telephone, Your Honor.
Judge, this is chapter 39.
This goes to diagnosis.
It goes to her investigation.
It's to diagnosis as an agent of the hospital.
Hey, Crystal, on the first break, would you be willing to call in on the burner phone?
Connect this to your medical malpractice claim, if you can. Tell me how you're doing that.
All right. It was a breach of the standard of care to refute the diagnosis of Dr. Kirkpatrick, and the note on the right indicates that he made this diagnosis on September 23rd, 2015. That's not the date of that note. He informed her of the date of his diagnosis, and he traced out his treatments. He traced out the reasons under the Budapest criteria. The note on the left also discusses the Budapest criteria: dystonia, allodynia, conditional to expected pain from human touch, and then generalized neural sensitivity or hyperesthesia. So this goes to the hospital, for whatever reason, deciding within 24 hours, 36 hours, that this was a diagnosis of the mother of Munchausen by proxy, rather than the diagnosis that had been maintained in the Johns Hopkins medical record and by Dr. Kirkpatrick for a year at that point.
That's the investigation, Your Honor.
I know that's the defense's position. It's just there is a jury question about whether Sally Smith is the apparent agent of the hospital, and there's a medical malpractice contention in this case.
But the proof has to be that the Kowalskis justifiably relied upon the belief that she was an agent of the hospital, and that at that time that she committed some form of malpractice that is negligence that was in the scope of her apparent agency. And what you've got is evidence that she's doing an investigation, and that the ultimate document of that investigation gets in the court file a month, 5 weeks later. The notion that there's anything that they are counting on relying upon her to do that they did wrong, so far I've heard no evidence of that.
Mm-hmm. Both Jack and Maya testified to their reliance on her entering the room with the hospital lab coat on. So we've established the agency prima facie. It's still a jury question. It may not go our way, but at this point, they've testified to that. And I point out that reliance in a hospital context is presumed when you have a doctor enter the room. That's the law on that issue.
And the big concern here.
That is not the law. That's a big fight we need to have yet.
Time out. Okay, I've done as best as I can to keep the lines as clear as possible. The reality is there is going to be some evidence that could go to either the Chapter 39 side or the med mal side. These 2 pages seem to go to both. And so since they go to both,
Judge,
and go to one, I'm tending to think that these notes are okay.
Well, Judge, let me ask you this. Who's interpreting these notes?
I don't know.
Who's going to testify about these notes?
I don't know.
Dr. Brewerton, he's not qualified to do that.
Not qualified to do what?
To give an opinion regarding Dr. Sally Smith. So it's going to be gibberish. It's not. Okay.
One at a time. Ms. Quarles has the floor.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's going to be
the court
a good
has
day.
Specifically ruled that Dr. Brewerton is not qualified to give opinions regarding Dr. Sally Smith. So how are these documents going? They're going to try to use these documents with Dr. Brewerton.
Perhaps Dr. Brewerton is the wrong person, but these 2 notes don't really offend me as far as being over the line on the Chapter 39 issues that we've been dealing with.
Defense is not happy.
I mean, this is all about, frankly, medical-related information.
If I may, there's a distinction between whether she made a diagnosis that was malpractice for the hospital, whether she did that in her investigation and the hospital was aware of that. They've never alleged
could be a jury
that
question.
we breached a standard of care for relying upon that diagnosis by someone in the CPT team. And so there's one question of whether she commits an act of negligence herself. It's another one whether
Why is it so quiet?
doctors relying upon that evaluation for something were negligent in relying upon it.
Well, we already have evidence that the doctors were conveying and talking with her extensively. And so it seems to me, Mr. Altenburn, that the defense is trying to slice this one really thin, and I just can't go there.
But keep in mind that we, under 39303 subpart 3, part of her duties are to do this investigation. And so, maybe if we're affirmatively calling her saying, what's up, that's one thing. But if she's calling to talk to us as the head of the CPT team, we've got to talk to her.
So the medical record is replete with her being there at multidisciplinary team meetings.
I'm very concerned we're going to create something that is going to be such of a mush that the jury's never going to be able to sort out these fine distinctions.
Well, but arguably, Johns Hopkins and Dr. Smith created the mush by blurring the lines there. That is the evidence that seems to be developing, Mr. Altenburn, and so it's difficult to say you get total immunity just because it's Dr. Sally Smith.
Can we move to the next pages?
At some point, we have to resolve the reason.
Well, these 2 pages, I'm not saying that they are going to be discussed during Dr. Brewerton, but these 2 pages themselves are not, in my mind, excludable.
All right. We'd like to move then to page 38.
Needs to move to admit them then. Once they're admitted, they can show them to anybody they want.
Sorry, exhibit number again?
And the reality is, if you were only going to use a handful of exhibit pages out of 200 pages, you've got to tell them.
There are, my recollection, of something like 146 pages of her handwritten notes. And our position is they're all relevant to the medical malpractice claim. So I understand, but our position is they're all relevant. So we're doing our best here without notice of which ones they object to. If you go up 38 and then 94, side by side.
38 and 90, you said what's next to that?
94.
Man, this is like trying to read a prescription for me. I'm looking at squiggles. Every case different. 10-day protocol.
Judge, I would point out that the 38 references other patients.
Gil De Jesus, welcome to the gallery. Good to have you here.
We could
Thank you
redact
very much.
the names of the other patients at the top.
Well, there's no way of knowing what part of those notes are related to them versus there's no context.
She's not recording treatments of the other patients. She's recording that Maya went under a Dr. Cantu for a 5-day ketamine coma. And then the script is related to Maya Kowalski. Those scripts have been seen by both sides. There was a PIC line. There was a PCA pump. All of these notes are, other than the 2 names at the top, which can be redacted, are related to Maya Kowalski's treatment.
Anything on 094, Ms. Crowell?
It'd be the same arguments, Judge.
Obviously, I agree with the redacting of the other patient names. Otherwise, these documents, which are 038 and 094, seem to track the 37 and 38, or 36 and 37.
Last page, Your Honor, is page 95, 2118095.
95.
It's almost 9 o'clock.
It's published.
Thank you.
What is this?
This is, again, it's a continuation of the previous note. If you want to put 94 side by side, this is Dr. Smith taking down what Dr. Hannah relayed to her about Maya's diagnosis and treatment for CRPS. So he's informing her about the Budapest criteria, which is the mention of Dr. Ayden. He's discussing Maya's presentation, that she was screaming in pain, she was better in a couple weeks, that CRPS causes hair. We might have to have him comment on that.
Well,
or
Judge,
on that.
again,
Mother
my
can
point
be pushy.
is...
It's a comment about Beata Kowalski. Children's misdiagnosed conversion disorder. They're on notice again. And then that he has been doing this for 20 years in collaboration with Dr. Schwartzman, and he provides these treatment for CRPS patients.
Well, Judge, that's his interpretation of these notes. My other concern is these notes do not give any valuable information to the jury. They have to interpret them in some fashion. There's no context
Is
here.
Dr. Sally Smith going to testify live?
I think it's for them. I think so.
Yes.
Yes.
Ooh.
Um, 094 and 095 seem to be along the lines of the ones I've previously reviewed, and my thoughts remain the same.
All right, that ends 2118 for the moment, although we'd like to come back to it, and we'll give them specific pages overnight because there are many in there that are also relevant. 2277 is the Johns Hopkins risk management file as produced to us by the hospital, and it's full of party admissions.
Judge, it's 800 pages.
Okay. The medical record is 3,600 pages.
Okay. I'm just not even going to respond to that, Judge. I didn't go through...
What are we doing? Are you just... You got hundreds and hundreds of pages. Here, just dump it, and we're only going to talk about 2 pages. What specifically are you trying to use? Because I've got 2 pages of exhibits, and we've done 2. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 others, and it's now 9 o'clock. You spent 30 minutes on 2 exhibits because you haven't narrowed down what you're trying to use. You have to be focused. You're going to run out of time. I haven't been charging you time against, your in-court time.
I understand. We will come back to this one overnight. We'll be back on this with specific pages tomorrow morning.
It seems like I'm having the same statement every single day, Mr. Whitney.
Your Honor, we're in a box here. We have to admit the risk management file because they're going to make all sorts of arguments in their case, and we need this evidence to have effective cross-examination of their witnesses. There's all sorts of party admissions in there in these 800 pages that contradict what they're going to try to do in their case. We'll come back to it tomorrow with more specificity if that's all right with the court.
Yes, you need to have specificity.
All right, we'll do it. The last, is 2338 Alpha, which is Dr. Timothy Brewerton's evaluation.
And he's a retained expert. And
yes.
When do we admit retained experts' opinions, reports?
Traditionally, my experience has been the courts don't. They usually rule them to be cumulative. In this instance, however, I have seen courts that will allow it as long as it substantially reflects.
Didn't you make the same argument to me about 3 months ago, and I said no then?
Yeah, but maybe you had a change of heart.
Now we're spending more time on it.
Maybe you had a change of heart.
I have to make the record, Judge, at least try. But
well, you had a court reporter present 2 or 3 months ago when I said no.
As to this Dr. Brewerton's report?
I remember having a distinct conversation in the context of Dr. Brewerton about use of reports, the retained expert reports. We discussed that.
I did not recall that one. So I will take it that one's denied.
That one's denied.
Your Honor, very, very briefly, with regard to Dr. Brewerton, since the report was mentioned, his entire report, and I know it's not going to be in evidence, but I'm worried about the opinion. His conclusion in his report was that the forced separation of Maya from her parents that was initiated by JHACH in the kidnapping abduction against her will by JHACH without permission, and the separation forced by JHACH resulting in permanent separation was the cause of her injury. So obviously that testimony would cause a mistrial. I would assume that plaintiffs have instructed Dr. Brewerton to be, that they will not elicit those opinions. He's not going to volunteer opinions that All Children's is responsible for the separation of Maya.
We are staying extremely far away from that, to the point we put in giant letters and notes in front of ourselves what we cannot ask. And so Dr. Brewerton's
you keep asking it.
Conclusion there will not be the topic of his testimony. He is providing an evaluation of the family as to the effects of the, what happened to Maya, mostly with Kathy Beatty.
Anything else before we bring in the jury?
So how many objections did I miss there? I think there were at least 4.
No, Your
No.
And one question, Your Honor, sorry. May Dr. Brewerton comment then on the documents that have been admitted into evidence, 2118, 038, 094, 095, and there were 2 others from the prior. What were the prior ones?
And Dr. Brewerton's your psychiatric expert. You're asking him to comment on the CRPS medical notes that Dr. Sally Smith took.
They go to, if you understand, you can't have
Didn't we just say Dr. Brewerton's probably not the person to be talking about Dr. Smith's notes? That was just like 15 minutes ago, right?
That's before this was in evidence.
Well, okay.
And here's the point is this. Well, yes, what we're trying to say, Judge, is if the child has CRPS, then as a psychological psychiatric certainty, she's not going to have Munchausen by proxy or conversion disorder. And that's the thing that he is going to explain, is that those 2 diagnoses, 2 on one side, 1 on the other, are mutually exclusive. If the child
how's
has
that possible when the by proxy is to the mom and CRPS is to Maya? Two different people.
Disorder was the and we don't even know it was the diagnosis, but the accused working diagnosis was conversion as to Maya. And conversion is, if you have CRPS, you're not going to have conversion, or at least the conversion disorder that they are talking about. It's difficult to understand exactly what they allege she has, but that's what's been flowing through the records coming into evidence.
Well, I don't see how Maya can have Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
I agree with you there. I also agree if the court's point is that they shouldn't be diagnosing Beata Kowalski as an adult.
No, you said they're mutually exclusive.
Yes, CRPS and Munchausen by proxy are mutually exclusive.
You're talking about 2 different people, though.
I understand, but if the victim does not display any of that, then there's no Munchausen by proxy.
The direct person-to-person comparison is CRPS and conversion are mutually exclusive, and conversion is a diagnosis of the young girl. So he should be allowed to testify to conversion disorder, the diagnostic criteria, and how if you have an organic physical condition, conversion disorder is not a valid psychological psychiatric diagnosis.
And he is not prohibited from opining on Dr. Katzenstein and Dr. Caddo.
Why does he need Dr. Sally Smith's notes to make that statement?
It goes to the knowledge that the doctors at Johns Hopkins had in continuing a diagnosis of Munchausen by proxy throughout this, from both the intake and the discharge.
Your Honor, the specific note is on page 95, and it's notice to the hospital, and it says specifically, children's misdiagnosed conversion disorder. Bottom left.
I don't see how you're using the Dr. Sally Smith's notes to make the point that you're trying to make about conversion disorder and CRPS. You can make it without referencing these notes at all.
It's not important enough to take up the court's time or the jury's time, Judge. I'll withdraw and just ask him based on his knowledge of the science.
Scratch all that.
While the court's bringing the jury in, may I advise the witness as to the court's ruling so I don't have any problems?
Yes, is he here in the courtroom?
No, I think he's sitting outside.
Okay, why don't you go do that and then let me know when you're ready so I can bring in the jury.
Thank you, Judge.
Your Honor, may I approach the clerk with evidence that we need to admit?
Yes. Has whatever you're going to give the clerk been shown to the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes,
Yeah, it's been agreed upon, I believe. But I'd be happy to do whatever you need to do. What's been agreed?
No, I think
Okay,
it's is it just the clips that were
spicy morning, 45 minutes of battle
Video files.
over just a handful of documents, and we didn't even get halfway through the list they wanted to talk about this morning.
That were admitted on agreements.
Can you just give us the numbers? So?
We did hear the judge has not been billing this time
previously,
against
not
the
yesterday.
sides.
Was it yesterday?
So he's got just court time.
I'm just going to make a copy. Sure. Okay.
10 minutes of argument and then withdraw. Yep, that's what we saw on the end. Okay, so we're going to go fetch the witness, make sure the witness is out there. Mr. Anderson is also going to be very specific about what they cannot go into. Looks like all of the plaintiff's team is headed out for a brief discussion. But there's clearly an area in this testimony that they've broached before in previous, whether it's depositions or something else, where if they go there, defense is going to call for and probably receive granted a mistrial. So that's what they're saying. Don't mention this on the stand. No, we don't have any of the family there today. Jack was not doing well because of the content of today, and I don't know exactly what that means, but because of the content of today, the siblings are not there. Maya and Kyle are not there, and then Jack had a bit of a cold, so out of an abundance of caution, they're not present today. Mr. Anderson's memory has failed him a couple times. I don't blame him. There's a lot here. But still, it seems like the plaintiff could have done a lot better in organizing this. It seems like they're playing hardball on the discovery, not discovery because it's all been turned over, but on announcing what they're going to be using the following day. If they just announced ahead of time, they'd be able to make this go smoother. But that being said, had they announced ahead of time, the defense would probably have a better argument against each of the items. And so they're sort of walking a fine line here. Maisla, I do not believe they're watching us, although they could be watching
Hey, please
one
be
of the big
seated,
channels.
everybody. Okay, members of the jury, I want to confirm while you're away, you did not discuss this case amongst yourselves. You did no investigation and received no information. Is that all correct? And since you were last with us, no one approached you about this case. Is that correct? And you observed or saw no media reports about this case. Is that correct? Mr. Anderson, please call your next witness.
Plaintiff's called Dr. Timothy Brewerton.
All right, doctors on the stand. First of, I believe, 3 today, if they can get through them. Kaylee, I'm not sure if this is, I think part of it's strategy, but I think we see the real Mr. Anderson here. So it could be a combination, his style and strategy. MD, welcome to the gallery. Good to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us as a subscriber and a member.
I do.
Court gestures here. Thank you, Bradley. Good to have you. here come the notes. What are you using? Defense gets to see those.
Morning.
Good morning.
Please state your name for the record.
Timothy David Brewerton.
And you are a doctor of both adult and pediatric psychiatry.
Yes.
And you also participated in forensic review of issues involving adult and pediatric psychiatry?
Yes.
And have you been asked here to offer opinions regarding the circumstances surrounding the treatment by Maya Kowalski at Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital and the resulting effects in terms of psychiatric, psychological disorders and the prognosis?
Yes, I have.
I'd like to give the jury the benefit so they understand from whence your opinions come, of your background, training, experience towards offering these opinions. If we can start with your undergraduate degree, give the jury a brief summary of your scholastics.
Okay. I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I went to LSU undergraduate and then majored in zoology with a minor in psychology. From there, I went to Tulane Medical School in New Orleans. I knew that I wanted to become a psychiatrist, so I took a lot of psychiatry and neurology when I was in medical school. And then I went to the University of California in San Francisco for my internship and psychiatric residency.
Dr. McDreamy, welcome to the gallery. Thanks for continuing
the research
support.
bug kind of bit me at that point, and I applied to a fellowship at National Institute of Mental Health, where I was doing psychopharmacologic work with eating disorder patients. Before that,
psychopharmacology.
Psychopharmacology is basically drugs that affect the brain and the psyche. And I studied in particular the serotonin system and other systems and their involvement in mental illness. Before that, I worked at Hawaii State Hospital as a public health service payback. From the National Institute of Mental Health, I took a faculty position at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston, where I have been a professor ever since. During my stint there, very shortly after starting at the Medical University of South Carolina, I got very interested in child abuse, basically because of some of the patients that I saw. I subsequently went back and I did, as an associate professor, a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship in 1994 to 96. Following that, I studied forensic psychiatry and I got board certified in forensic psychiatry. And then later on, I got interested in addiction, and I'm also board certified in addiction medicine. So I'm quadruply board certified in general psychiatry, child adolescent psychiatry, forensic psychiatry, and addiction medicine.
And have you, and where are you licensed?
Right. South Carolina, and I'm also licensed as a medical doctor expert witness in Florida.
All right. And have you published papers in these areas that may be of significance in your evaluation of the Kowalskis in this circumstance?
Yes, I have. I've published approximately 185 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters, reviews. And many of those are in the realm of comorbid psychiatric disorders, including mood disorders, anxiety disorders, substance use disorders. My particular interest has been in post-traumatic stress disorder.
And
I'm editor of 2 books. I've presented at a lot of international meetings and have been very academically oriented, but I'm a clinician who also does research.
And tell us about your hospital privileges and where you have practiced in the hospital setting of your career.
Sure. I worked moonlighting when I was a resident in Sacramento, California. I've been a staff psychiatrist at Highland General in Oakland. I worked for the U.S. Public Health Service at Hawaii State Hospital. I worked at the National Institute of Mental Health as a medical staff fellow, and privileges there. I was a director of the eating disorder program and attending psychiatrist at the Medical University of South Carolina Institute of Psychiatry. I worked on the consultation liaison service there initially. I've been a consultant to the National Crime Victims Research and Treatment Center, and that's where I learned a lot about trauma and its effects and PTSD and other trauma-related disorders. Then I've been a consultant at a number of eating disorder facilities, higher levels of care. Possibly people are familiar with residential care centers. So I consult with, I've consulted with a number of residential treatment centers, Rosewood, Rivermend, Eating Recovery Center and Pathlight programs, Montanito and affiliates that has over 40 sites across the country in 13 states. I was Director of Clinical Outcomes and Research for Montanito. So I was Executive Medical Director at the Hearth Center for Eating Disorders in Columbia, South Carolina. So I've had a lot of varied experience in my career.
And how long have you been in practice?
Well, let's see, I got my degree in 1978, my MD, and I completed my residency in 1982, and that's when I became board certified in general psychiatry. But I've had a license to practice medicine since 1978.
And over this period of time, particularly after you developed a subspecialty in child abuse, can you give the jury some idea of the number of pediatric child abuse victims patients that you've had the opportunity to evaluate and or study?
Hundreds. I've seen hundreds of patients, and unfortunately child trauma is extremely common. And so I can't give you an exact number, but it's certainly in the hundreds.
All right, and you live in Charleston, South
I do.
Carolina?
I live in Charleston County, South Carolina.
So what did you understand your assignment to be when you were retained by our firm to evaluate this case?
To first off look at the records and also evaluate Maya and her family in terms of their psychiatric status diagnostically, and to give an overview of what my opinion was in terms of their psychiatric status, and to comment about the events that led up to the current problems that she's having.
And as part of that, did you also evaluate Kyle and Jack?
Yes, I
Kowalski?
did. Yes, I did.
And was part of your assignment to evaluate the prognosis for this family, and in particular Maya Kowalski?
That's right. In addition to making a diagnostic assessment and diagnoses based on the records, as well as very careful structured interviews of Maya and her family, to comment about the implications of those findings long-term, including the prognosis and possible long-term effects to the extent that one can anticipate.
Tell the jury then how you went about this. Was this a three-step program, two-step program? And I'm specifically orienting you towards the review of the record and then the investigation, if you will, and evaluation of the Kowalskis themselves.
Well, it started with getting the voluminous amount of medical records, not only from Johns Hopkins All Children's, but all of the places that we had available records for Maya. And looking at those, and they're literally thousands of pages, and going through those and kind of determining, her course, her historical, medical, psychiatric course. And then arranging for Maya and her family to complete some self-report measures. I'm very, I try to be as objective as I possibly can when I make evaluations for forensic purposes. And so I use a lot of validated instruments that are in the literature to measure things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, quality of life, ADHD, and so forth. I don't just rely on asking questions. I ask them to complete the self-reports, and then I come back with, after that, and I do what's called a structured interview.
These are structured interviews. They're a list of set questions that I go through kind of systematically with the parent when you have a child that you're evaluating, because often the parent has a very different perspective about how the child is doing. And then I also do the same kind of thing with the child or adolescent. So it's a very comprehensive, it takes several hours to do these kinds of evaluations.
And during 2022, your scope of evaluations for this case, how many times did you meet with one of the Kowalskis in order to gather the information necessary?
The initial examination took place over 3 days, January 20th, the 24th, and the 30th of 2022. I had some email contact with them through your office in terms of sending them the self-report instruments that I wanted them to complete, so that when I did meet with them, we could go over them.
And have you kept in touch with the Kowalskis since that time?
Yes, I have.
So let's go over then briefly your findings in terms of the psychological testing, or maybe we should go over, if you would like, anything out of the records that were provided to you that was significant leading up to the testing and evaluation.
Sure. I think, my opinion is based on the records and the interview and my history and the entirety of my assessment, right? And so basically the bottom line is what I found and what I think is that there was a misdiagnosis of Munchausen's by proxy and factitious disorder. Those require...
Okay, so we have a loud noise. Let's turn that off for a second while they get that sorted. That is super loud. Still going, still going. Okay, so defense has said they'd like to approach because of that, the misdiagnosis of Munchausen's and fictitious disorder. I think that he should have said conversion, but I'm not sure. Is the sound still on? There we go. They just turned it off. All right. You are a sound wizard, said Dusty Den. No, I just turned the sound off, that's all. Interesting, the doctor here says, I based my opinion, my expert opinion, on all these medical records. So he's basically saying, my opinion was based on that. This is how he justifies getting asked about the opinions in the records that we fought over this morning. He's saying that my opinion is based on that, so I can comment on them. And so he sort of called for the evidence himself. And now they're going to be able to present these notes, unless of course we've got. Oh, you know what? I bet he never said he based his opinion on the medical records. We have a troll that as fast as they can create accounts, they come in here to say they reported this channel by, I don't know who peed in their Cheerios this morning, but just give her a big hug. Bullhorn Betty needs a lot of love. If you see another troll come in, just pat them nicely on the head, give them a sandwich, and let's let them be. They clearly have a tough life. If they'd like to talk to me on the burner phone, that would be great. I'll see if I can help them through whatever they're going through. But don't in a way, don't feed the trolls. No sandwiches for trolls, apparently. You give them a lollipop or something. Yeah, YouTube can see when somebody just creates an account to come in and report something and go out, and YouTube gives it. They basically file it in the circular file. So. They think they're getting somewhere. They're spinning their wheels, but it actually does nothing. It's okay. There's somebody who's mad at somebody here, and it might not have been anything we did. It might be they might know you from a different channel or think they know you from something else, and they want to, they're upset. But Just show him a little bit of love. Working on becoming a counselor for trolls. Is there a certification for that? Okay, here we go. Let's hear. I don't think he said in his report that he based it off that. So let's see what happens.
Let's talk about the testing that you did on the Kowalskis and the history that you took from them, given the parameters we discussed.
The objection was sustained.
Do you want me to go through each test?
Yes, briefly.
Okay.
Just so the jury has an idea of what was significant here.
Okay. So the parent-reported instruments that I asked Jack to complete on both Maya and Kyle included the UCLA PTSD Reaction Index for DSM-5, the Child Depression Inventory parent version, the Vanderbilt ADHD Diagnostic Parent Rating Scale, the Multidimensional Anxiety Scale for Children, second edition parent report, the Screen for Child Anxiety-Related Disorders, the parent version, the Child Dissociative Checklist, and the Pediatric Quality of Life Inventory, parent report for teens.
And what are those designed to do?
Those are designed to assess for PTSD, ADHD, depression, anxiety disorders, an array of different types of anxiety disorders, dissociation, and quality of life, which all mental illness, all mental disorders require some sort of disturbance or impairment in life, in quality of life, to make a problem a disorder. In addition, I gave self-assessment instruments to both Maya and Kyle, including the Life Events Checklist for the DSM-5, which measures traumatic events, gets their subjective report of what was traumatic to them, the PTSD Symptom Checklist for DSM-5, which is an assessment of PTSD symptoms according to our diagnostic criteria, the Multidimensional Anxiety Scale for Children, the Screen for Child Anxiety-Related Disorders, the Youth version, the Child Depression Inventory, the Child Adolescent Perfectionism Scale. And I also gave to Maya and Kyle the Traumatic Grief Inventory self-report, which measures persistent, complicated bereavement, given the situation with their mother. I also gave Maya the Adolescent Pediatric Pain Tool as a general assessment of her pain level and where she was experiencing pain at that time. And if you want me to go ahead and talk about findings.
Yes. Now that let me ask you, are those tests generally accepted within the psychiatric medical community as the best measures, indications of the psychological status of the patient?
Yes, they're all highly reliable and validated, is what we say in statistics and clinical research. They've been tested and documented to really assess what they are meant to assess.
And are there built-in safeguards against manipulation or an attempt to produce a result, a foregone conclusion, if you will?
They can possibly be manipulated. That is true, and so but there are some ways that you can get around that or see the consistency. Part of why I gave them so many, if you notice, some of them were measuring the same thing from a different angle. So depending on how you ask a question, and if you get different answers, that can be a tip-off to some manipulation or.
And do you then check the results against your interviews to determine whether there are any inherent?
That's right. You check for the consistency between the self-report and the interview, and just the whole historical narrative, and also the records.
And so, what was significant about the history insofar as what was told to, or what the Kowalskis were informed of the treatment of Maya while she was in the hospital?
Would you repeat that, please?
Sure. I'll tell you what, I think that question is premature. Well, let's go over the results of the examination.
Okay. So it was very strong evidence that Maya is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder chronically ever since she got out of Hopkins. She also has recurrent major depressive disorder of moderate severity. She also had persistent, complicated traumatic bereavement. Everyone understands grief. It's a part of humanity. We all have loss and deal with that. But sometimes it can be complicated and prolonged and problematic. And that's the case. And, there's also the issue of misdiagnosis, which I'm not sure if I can talk about. Because there are some things that I found,
Your Honor.
and then there are some things.
Sorry. I think you need to go to the next question.
Yes, sir.
You can't talk about the misdiagnosis.
Let's go over just the basic then diagnoses of Kyle and Jack Kowalski, and then we'll come back to the consequences and sequelae.
Okay.
Consequences and sequelae.
This was a trauma for everyone, especially Maya, but also Kyle and also Jack. And all of the family had met criteria for major depressive disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder and persistent complicated bereavement.
What happens when all three members of a family are suffering from these disorders concurrently? What are the effects on the family dynamics?
Well, they're not really able to be a support to each other. If they're all impaired and they're all suffering, I mean, people often get by with a little help from our friends, right, and from our families. And so family member support is enormously important in dealing with and coping with and recovering from traumas like this. But mental disorders and medical disorders, regardless, family support is enormously important. And so if everyone is suffering and kind of in the same hole, it makes it much harder to get out of that hole.
So Maya going in, the baseline for Maya going into this episode with Johns Hopkins, with her CRPS, how did you distinguish the symptoms and issues from the CRPS from the psychological problems that you found through the testing and interviewing process?
I reviewed the literature extensively. I've probably read over 100 papers in this case, various aspects of it. And one important area of the literature is...
Objection to bolstering.
Sustained.
Just tell us what the overall view you have as a result of your investigations.
There's a tremendous overlap in symptomatology between complex regional pain syndrome and certain psychiatric disorders. And it is often confused with conversion disorder. There's an enormous literature about that. I can't talk about the literature. Okay. There's an enormous confusion between complex regional pain syndrome, given the symptomatology, because it doesn't. It's a relatively newer disorder. First, it was called reflex sympathetic dystrophy, and they thought it was a overreaction of the sympathetic nervous system, and that's how it got that name. A small injury with a dramatic response that seemed out of proportion to the initial injury, and so that's why they call it a sympathetic dystrophy. But they realized that the sympathetic nervous system alone was not the only thing involved in complex regional pain syndrome. It really involves not only the autonomic or peripheral nervous system, but the central nervous system as well. And there have been a number of studies and alterations found in brain scans and other physiological measures, neurophysiological measures in people with complex regional pain syndrome. They often have psychiatric symptoms and depression. And this is true just in the pain literature in general, in the medical literature in general. When you are suffering with enormous pain, and we've already heard that the McGill pain on the McGill pain scale, CRPS has some of the worst pain known to man. It's at the top of the scale in terms of what it can produce pain-wise. So
my question,
people suffer enormously.
My next question was how did that pain influence these?
That's my next statement. Yeah,
I have to ask questions every once in a while.
So when people are suffering with that kind of pain, it leads to psychological reactions. Understandably, I mean, it's not rocket science, right? That you might get super anxious and depressed and stressed, and a lot of psychiatric disorders have in common the activation of the stress axis. We have a stress system in our bodies and in our brains and part of it is the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight that you've heard of, certainly, but there's a whole endocrine response or hormonal response that starts in the brain that releases tremendous amounts of cortisol put out by the adrenal glands to help us deal with stress. And this has a kind of a domino effect in the brain in terms of other neurotransmitters, neuroendocrine systems, and hormonal systems, peptide systems, just the neurochemicals in the brain are downstream affected in a major way, and the receptors through which neurons communicate with each other, and the production of inflammation. And inflammation is a very common mechanism we've across neurological and psychiatric and medical disorders. And this notion that brain and mind or body and mind are separate is really a myth, because we're one organism, and we have mental aspects and we have physical aspects, and they're really inseparable. And when you have physical disorders, particularly those that affect the brain, you typically have psychological disorders as well, or reactions or symptoms. Very, very, very common. And so there's an enormous confusion often about, particularly when you can't pinpoint to the lesion or the problem in the brain, which neurologists have traditionally tried to do. The stroke is here in this part of the brain, and it's producing these symptoms, and it's predictable. With CRPS, we're still learning. Science, medicine, psychiatry, neurology is an evolving field, constantly evolving. There are literally hundreds of articles published every day that have to do with mental illness, neurological disorders.
This is not responsive to the question.
I'll ask another question. All right. So when you've got this overlay of inflammation and the pain responses, does it exacerbate the diagnoses that you made of the psychological disorders?
Yes.
And so in doing so, does it amplify the effects, practical effects on the patient?
Yes, and often to treat the mental part, you have to treat the physical part effectively. You don't just compartmentalize it and say, I'm just going to do this piece of it. You treat the whole patient, right? And so in order to deal with the depression, you have to deal effectively with the pain and the source of the pain, right? And vice versa.
And so in this instance, with Maya being diagnosed, let's talk about the effects of the accusations of Munchausen by proxy on this family in terms of producing these psychological disorders.
When people come to a tertiary care center, in the emergency room of a tertiary care center, they are not their best self at that moment. They are tremendously dependent, helpless, needy. They're in desperation.
This is not responsive to the question.
It's getting there.
Let's get there.
Okay.
The objection was
if we can, as succinctly as we can, state how the idea that that wife and mother might be somehow is being accused of actually harming them. How did that affect them psychologically in terms of developing these disorders?
So they're not getting their needs met appropriately. They're being actually accused of...
Your Honor, we may be approaching.
You may.
All right, and now we approach. I'm pretty sure I can't. Yeah, the judge mutes the Zoom during a sidebar, so I can't listen in and hear what's happening. Defense is defensing. This is what defense is doing. I think these objections, they are assigned to whoever makes the objection. That's my understanding. So I think it counts against the defense time when these objections come up. But okay, they're gonna keep working it out here. This is a dangerous witness to the defense, a very dangerous witness, and they are doing all they can to keep him from getting into that dangerous territory. And the judge has made a few rulings apparently that go along with that. It seems like the records, the medical records that they seem to be steering questions towards initially, that suddenly got set on the back burner. And the judge, the doctor who was reviewing notes and had the notes in front of him where he was going to go, when the next question came up, he sort of got a confused look on his face and skipped ahead in his report. So it looks like he was prohibited by a defense motion from talking about those records, those handwritten notes that we saw earlier this morning. So defense is being very effective in what they're doing here. Looks like a good doctor needs a drink, so he will get himself a drink of water. Wish we had the ASMR from that, but okay. My Zoom feed's a little further advanced, and it's still going on. The discussion's still going on. Judge is still talking, so we're waiting. Unfortunately, I cannot show you the Zoom feed. That's one of the rules about the Zoom feed. It's like Fight Club. I can talk about it in this case, but I can't let you hear it or see it. So. Oh, got a little notice from Zoom. That's cool. The look he just gave the defense. Yeah, this is crazy. Mr. Anderson's trying to be fast and get there quickly, and the witness wants to be slow. I think the witness is getting paid by the hour and possibly has trained himself to speak in this manner, or maybe that's just his style as an expert witness with all the expertise he has. He's very thorough. It's dangerous for the plaintiff, yes, if he goes into the off-limits testimony areas. Then we end up with a mistrial. And that would be very bad. But that's going to be on Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson should be quicker to anticipate the answer than defense making an objection. So that's going to be on him. He needs to be careful with what he asks and couch his questions very carefully. It's so crazy how the jury cannot hear what is said at the sidebar. Oh, no, that's probably good because they're talking about things the jury should not hear. If the jury asks for further information, then the question will not be asked. If it's an inappropriate question, if a lawyer could not ask the question in court, the jury cannot ask a question in court. And that's why we've had several jury questions that have been set aside and would not be asked by the judge. Let's see. Amber, member for 1 month. So I think the defense is only highlighting the areas the hospital is concerned about, and I have no doubt the jury's picking it up. They are, but they need to hear like the hard evidence, that exact point. The judge is making some big hand gestures here. And he's trying to explain something to Mr. Anderson. Okay, so it looks like they're done with the Zoom right now. They're done with the sidebar. So they're gonna move down, and we're gonna proceed. Give them just a second to get back in position, and Mr. Anderson can resume questioning the witness. There we go.
Objection sustained. Objection sustained.
Another sustained objection. So now they're...
Let's stick with Maya. What was the effect on Maya of this diagnosis against her mother?
I will allow that question.
Devastating.
Actually, hold on a second. I sustain it because of the word diagnosis. That's
the result. All right. What was the effect on Maya of the accusations against her mother of Munchausen by proxy?
Single objection.
We'll allow that.
Confusion, disbelief, devastation, feeling misunderstood, blamed, victimized, shamed, increase in stress rather than decreasing pain and stress, increasing stress and pain of a psychological and physical nature.
And insofar as how it related to your diagnoses of depression and of post-traumatic stress disorder, was this part of the cause there?
Yes.
And so now, as time has gone on, I want to talk a little bit about the prognosis here on Maya, given what you understand about the diagnosis of CRPS and how it's going to interact in the future with your diagnosis of PTSD and chronic depression.
Okay. So Maya has evidence of 3 very chronic illnesses. CRPS, which tends to be lifelong, as you heard from Dr. Chopra. Recurrent major depressive disorder. And this is at least the 2nd or 3rd episode, severe episode, that Maya has had. She's had at least 2 or 3. And we know that a lot of people don't understand this, but major depression is a brain disorder. It's one of the most disabling conditions on the planet. And we know that as it gets worse and more recurrent, each subsequent episode is harder and harder to treat. It gets more and more severe. There's something that it does to the brain in terms of making a groove in the brain so that it becomes more and more treatment refractory with time. And the same is true for PTSD. And when you have this kind of comorbidity, comorbidity just meaning multiple disorders, particularly when you have a chronic pain-related disorder, that makes the psychiatric component tend to be more severe and harder to treat, because you have to treat the pain disorder effectively to treat the mental disorder as well. PTSD tends to be a chronic disorder. Studies shown 20 years later, 40% of people still have the full diagnosis of PTSD. This is big studies done by the World Health Organization.
Your Honor, object to the bolstering.
Overrule, you can continue.
So there have been a number of long-term studies of PTSD showing that it tends to be a chronic disorder. And Maya has already had PTSD now for 6.5 years. And so
what does that indicate now that she's had it consistently through this period of time?
It indicates that it's not something that just goes away with no treatment, and sometimes with treatment, sometimes with the best treatment, it doesn't go away. And even when you don't meet full criteria, people often have subclinical evidence of PTSD. They don't meet the full criteria, but they meet a lot of the criteria. And so 40% may have full criteria, but then there's several tens of percent that have significant partial criteria that they're continuing to suffer with. So most people don't completely recover where they don't have any symptoms. And so when you combine all of these, the CRP, the complex regional pain syndrome, the recurrent major depression, and the PTSD, and most people with PTSD also have depression, and it makes it harder to treat. So it makes for a very guarded and negative long-term prognosis.
How does the avoidance strike it? Did you find that as part of your evaluation that Maya first had developed any avoidance techniques or problems?
Yeah.
Better way to put it.
So there are 4 major clusters of symptoms in PTSD.
And I'm going to then ask you to bring those back.
And so avoidance is one of them. and avoidance of any reminders of the trauma. And we've already heard from Maya that she avoids doctors. And that was really crystal clear in my evaluation of Maya and her family. She doesn't want to get anywhere near a medical professional, even though at some level cognitively, logically, she knows that she could probably need it, but she's not about to do it because of the fear, the intense avoidance that is part and parcel of PTSD, along with the hyperarousal, the anxiety, the intrusive images, the flashbacks, the nightmares, the sleeplessness. There's a whole host of symptoms. A lot of people think that this is just something that happens to combat veterans. No. It happens in civil life with civil interpersonal traumas all the time, especially interpersonal traumas.
Did you document those symptoms in Maya Kowalski?
I did, yes, in spades.
And what were the test results that brought that out, or the interview process that brought that out?
The instruments that I named earlier that measure PTSD symptoms that were endorsed by not only Maya herself, but also by Jack, and then also doing structured interview, which is the highest gold standard of diagnosing PTSD, is where you do a structured interview using one of these reliable instruments. And I used the Kitty SADS, which is the Schedule for Affective Disorders and Schizophrenia. It's a common structured interview used in children in research and clinical settings to make sure that you get the correct diagnosis. It has very high reliability. So,
what were some of the things that Maya developed an avoidance of as a result of her experience?
So I'm just saying that you got two self-reports, Maya's self-report, Jack's self-report, and structured interview of Maya and structured interview of her father, Jack, and all of them confirm PTSD, is what I'm saying. Plus, there was a diagnosis made prior by Rebecca Johnson and also by the psychiatrist that subsequently saw her after, and who did not have, who was not privy to my notes, who diagnosed her with PTSD, Dr. Hinchey. So
yeah.
What symptoms did she have?
Yes, we'll give the jury some examples of the avoidance that you documented, if you've got any.
Okay. For example, not wanting to go anywhere near St. Petersburg, where Johns Hopkins is located. Not wanting to go in that direction. Not going anywhere near the hospital. Not going to any doctors. And Maya has, chronic conditions, and she needs medical care. Her best chances of having a better outcome are getting evidence-based treatment for all of the conditions that she has. But she's loath to do that because of the fear that has been that has a result of her PTSD and her experiences.
But doctor, she has been to, say, a dermatologist and to a dentist over the course of this. How does
there are some things that are much less threatening than others. A dentist is not going to keep you in his office.
Right.
And there are certain people that she had to see just to maintain a minimum of her health. And she already had a relationship with her family physician, Dr. Wazenar, for example. He is one of the more trusted people, but she still doesn't like it, and it still may elicit intrusive imagery of her traumas.
Separator, that's going to be next week.
Now, the future for her in light of this avoidance, what does that portend for her ability to recover from episodes of any one of these, depression or severe PTSD or the CRPS breakouts?
Yeah. Well, she's better, but she hasn't fully recovered. And so it's a negative prognosis. And so we know, we've learned a tremendous amount in the last 30 years about the role that trauma plays in general. Some people may have heard of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, and there are hundreds of articles now about the effects of adverse childhood experiences on all of the major medical disorders that people die from. we're not just talking about psychiatric disorders. We're talking about it being a validated risk factor for the development of cardiac disease and diabetes and cancer and autoimmune disorders and neurological disorders and substance use disorders and suicide and certainly depression, a certain degree of eating disorders. And so there's a host of psychiatric and medical disorders that we know are higher in people who've had childhood trauma. And this is not...
Your Honor, respectfully, this is again not
I'm about to ask a question.
Okay, let's get to the next question.
And
so the prognosis is negative.
Doctor, let's answer his questions.
Thank you. I was speaking more of when Maya has these problems in the future, her avoidance of, say, a hospital ER or PICU, intensive care unit, or anything associated with what went on to her. How is that going to affect her ability to recover from these episodes?
Objection leading.
Overall, you can answer that question.
It's going to likely negatively impact it if she doesn't pursue getting the proper care at the proper time and continues to avoid it.
Now, in my circumstance, the process of aging and more responsibilities in her life, how will this affect her ability to deal with those or respond to those in terms of overcoming these psychological problems?
Yeah. Does life get easier as we get older? I don't think so. I think it continues to become challenging at every point. And, Maya is now still in her family's home, in her father and brother's home, but she's about to go out into the world, presumably, and eventually leave home. And so life will present any number of challenges and potential stressors and traumas. And trauma is ubiquitous. And so it's likely that she will sustain other major challenges that will likely compromise her psychologically and medically.
Doctor, I want you to assume for the purposes of this question that even at her position right now, finishing school, she still has not retaken her SATs anytime in the past 5 years. She has not applied to any colleges. She has not pursued any further work or consistent hobbies,
right,
or any real plans for what's next. Do you have an opinion based upon your background, training, and experience, and to a reasonable medical probability, if these facts indicate that Maya will have problems in the future?
Objection, mischaracterization, foundation, and speculation.
Overruled. You can answer.
Maya leads a fairly sheltered and alone life, and she's withdrawn from the world. She's not as active and out in the world as she once was prior to these events. And so one of the things that we know that happens with PTSD is that people don't have much hope. They have less hope for the future. They often think that they're going to die young. They often think that the life doesn't really hold much in store for them. They often have what is called anhedonia, and they don't experience pleasure like many of us do, just with the regular simple things in life. So there's a bluntedness and a numbing and a negativity that is kind of cast over one's overview of life going forward.
Did you diagnose allodonia in Maya to any degree?
She reported it. I didn't examine her physically, but she certainly reported it, and it's throughout the records.
Do you have an opinion based upon your background, training, and experience, and to a reasonable medical probability as to whether Maya Kowalski sustained post-traumatic stress disorder from the events at Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital?
I do, absolutely, unquestionable. She did.
Do you have an opinion based upon your background, training, and experience, and to a reasonable medical
psychological probability as to whether Maya Kowalski sustained major depressive disorder as a result of her experience in Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital?
I do. It was made worse and more persistent, and with the advent or addition of PTSD, it was made more relatively harder to treat and more likely treatment refractory. She did have some milder depressive symptoms going into her admission to Hopkins, and it was getting better when she was being admitted because her CRPS was getting better at that time. And then afterwards, though, she had much more severe and retracted depressive symptoms. And then she had a relapse in 2020, which was right around the same time that she was in Hopkins, by the way, in November. And people often have anniversary reactions that trigger memories, they trigger depression. It's no accident, I think, that this happened in November and she had been admitted in October 4 years earlier.
Did it come to your attention that at least 2 of Maya Kowalski's CRPS relapses were triggered by psychological factors?
Yes.
And my question is then, how will Maya be able to know which psychological factors, as she gets older, will put her back into a CRPS relapse or a state of depression that limits her ability to function in the world?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled, you can answer.
So what can help her deal with that? I think psychotherapy could help her deal with that, to become more self-aware and harm avoidant.
So far, she's not indicated a lot of desire to go back to psychotherapy.
Definitely not.
And did you discover through your investigation why?
Yes, I think I've talked about how she doesn't want to get anywhere near a white coat or anybody in the medical profession. And because it elicits intrusive imagery, it elicits hyperarousal, fear, anxiety, depression. It brings back memories of her stay there, of her mother, the loss, the whole 9 yards.
And do you have an opinion based upon your background, training, experience, and to a reasonable medical probability as to whether the psychological, psychiatric disorders you have diagnosed Maya Kowalski with will substantially impact her ability to earn money in the future, that is, diminish her earning capacity?
Yes, there's clear evidence that these kinds of disorders, particularly the combination that I've mentioned, definitely influences one's earning capacity down the road.
In terms of the prognosis that you have given us, can you give the jury some idea, although they'll hear it from Dr. Bifulco and others later, but can you give the jury an idea of, if we could get Maya to do it, what would be your recommendation as to the appropriate care?
Okay. Well, I think she needs to be in psychotherapy, as I've mentioned.
How often and at what periods?
And I think with this is really an example of complex trauma, meaning that this is not just one incident, one single isolated incident. This is a host of events that occurred to her that make, on top of having a chronic, terribly painful illness, and on top of losing her mother and having less support. So all of that together makes her trauma complex. And so it makes her treatment more long-term and her needing more long-term psychotherapy and more regular psychotherapy.
Can you give us some,
once or twice a week.
Okay. Quantitative
indefinitely.
Is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and usually psychiatrists, some psychiatrists will do psychotherapy. Most are focusing on medication management these days. But so if that's the case and she's seeing another psychotherapist separate from the psychiatrist will need to see her at least monthly in addition to her psychotherapy. And she's also, needs antidepressant medications, in my opinion, which can help not only the depression, but also the PTSD.
And how often will
the combination of the psychopharmacology and the psychotherapy can also often be effective in at least significantly attenuating or dampening the symptoms that we're talking about.
All right, the 1 to 2 weeks psychotherapy. First, again, this all assumes you get Maya there to do it.
Right.
But, for what period of time, if we were to get her to do it starting in a month, how long would you expect to a reasonable psychological probability she would need to get her to the best place she could be? And my next question will be, then when she has breakouts, what do we want to call them, how long?
Well, it's really impossible to know when and if she will respond, and I think the answer really is, and not to be flippant, but the answer is she needs it as long as she needs it, and that could be indefinitely, and so it depends on how she does over time, and also psychotherapy and treatment, psychiatric, psychological treatment, mental health treatment is a collaborative endeavor, right? So she will decide to what extent it's helping, to what extent she needs to continue it. It's not something that's mandated, and we want to stay away from mandating anything with Maya. It needs to be focused on establishing trust and an alliance, which is going to be slow to reestablish that with someone who can see her more long term and who can kind of look at the big picture, not only her psychiatric issues, but her medical and neurological issues as well.
You had testified previously that now the psychiatrists are involved more in the pharmacology, the writing.
Yes.
So to properly maintain her on the medications and adjust as necessary, approximately how often will she need to see a psychiatrist for those medical psychological issues?
Well, she's had 2 or 3 episodes of major depression, has chronic PTSD, plus the CRPS, plus dealing with the bereavement. We know that when people have 3 separate episodes of major depression, they essentially need to be on antidepressant medications for life. If you had 1 episode, the chances of a next episode are 50-50. If you've had 2 episodes, the chances of another episode, no matter what you do to avoid it, are 95%. Or, I'm sorry, if you've had 2, it's 75%. If you've had 3, it's 95%. So once you've had 3 separate episodes, you pretty much need to treat people for life. And antidepressants, by and large, that may sound horrible, but antidepressants actually are very effective in a lot of people.
This is going to
and
damages.
They have relatively minor side effects compared to the benefits that people can receive from them. Now, many people don't respond to the first antidepressant or the second antidepressant, and often it's a trial and error kind of process. And now, if you don't respond to that, or you don't get a full response to that, there are other emerging treatments that are available, like transcranial magnetic stimulation or RTMS. And so that's a FDA-approved treatment for treatment refractory depression. And there are other, actually we know ketamine is now a treatment, very common around the country and in the world for treatment refractory depression. It's ironic, but that's the data.
All right, so once a year or twice a year, how often?
How often for what?
To see a psychiatrist to adjust your meds.
At least once a month, if not sooner. If you're starting a new medicine, it probably needs to be more frequent, every week or 2. When you're having change, when she's more stable, then at least once a month.
And how long will that last?
I would say indefinitely.
Once every 6 months, once a year?
I think given her history and given the number of episodes that she's had already, it's likely that she'll need that for life. More likely than not.
And in your opinion, based upon your background, training, and experience, are these a reasonable medical solution derived from the causation of what she experienced at Johns Hopkins?
Absolutely. Very clearly. She
Now-
didn't have PTSD before she went to Hopkins.
So now let's talk for a second about Maya seems to look okay outwardly, and she testified before the jury here. Some emotion, as you may have seen. Were you able to watch her?
Yes, I was in the courtroom yesterday watching her.
And so what the jury would like to know, I think, is, so how can she look good here in this situation and have all these things you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a common myth that you can tell by looking at people who has mental illness. And probably a third or half of the people in this room have had some kind of mental illness diagnosed. But you can't just tell by looking at people, right? And Maya has a kind of personality that tends to be perfectionistic and very stoic. And she talked about how she has a very high pain threshold. And she can be in pain, but not necessarily look like she's in pain. Because people express pain in very different ways, based on their culture, based on their personality, based on their history, based on the level of support that they're having in their lives. It's a highly variable thing in terms of how people experience and express pain. And so you cannot tell just by looking at someone. You have to ask them. You have to give them permission to really talk openly and honestly about their experience, physical, mental, and you have to listen. You have to be open to what they're telling you. And we all know that the best doctors out there, regardless of specialists or specialty, are the ones who are listening to us. And we get that they get it. Right? We get that they get us. And that helps form an alliance, which is really crucial to all doctor-patient relationships.
Let me ask you, is Maya at any higher risk for suicide given the combination of these problems, psychological as well as physical?
Absolutely. She has several risk factors for suicide risk. Complex regional pain syndrome. You've heard it be called the suicide disease. Mm-hmm. All right, that's because the data show very high rates of suicide in people with this disorder. She has PTSD. You may have heard out there that people with PTSD, they're up to 20 people a day. 20 veterans with PTSD a day who suicide. PTSD has a several-fold higher risk of suicide just alone. Recurrent major depression also has its own risk of suicide, right? And so we have a girl who's lost her mother to suicide. She has at some level a genetic predisposition to suicide. We know that there's a heritability component to suicide and mental disorders. And then finally, she's lost a mother. She's a child who psychologically has lost a mother at a very tender age when she needed her most. And kids who lose their parents from suicide are known in the literature, and there are several studies, have a higher risk of suicide. So she has like 5 things right there in terms of high risk for suicide. And that's another reason why she needs long-term good psychiatric, psychological, mental health care with someone or some people who she can establish a trusting alliance with, because that is protective.
Do you have an opinion based upon your background, training, and experience into a reasonable medical probability as to whether Maya Kowalski will have one or more suicidal attempt or ideation through the course of her life?
Object to this speculation.
Overall, you can answer.
It's likely. The odds are in favor of that happening. Of course, we can't know any one individual, but in terms of group statistics and odds, yes.
Did it come to your attention through the course of I want to turn to Jack Kowalski for a moment. Did it come to your attention through your investigation that Jack Kowalski was being kept abreast of what was being done to his daughter at Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital during that stay? I'm talking about Kathy Beatty and
only partially, and certainly not in the way that I would have liked to expect or have seen.
And so, do you have an opinion based upon your background, training, experience, and to a reasonable medical probability, based on the test results and your history, as to whether Jack Kowalski has some degree of PTSD?
Objection. I think we need to approach on this briefly.
Yeah, Jack is not in court. Maya is not in court. And Kyle is not in court. No, all three of them are out. I'm a little distracted. I have to admit, I'm trying to follow two things. Trying to follow a very active war scene in another country with a live camera feed, watching planes make strikes and things. And then I'm also trying to listen to this, so I apologize if I'm a little distracted. They can watch the stream. They're Susie Hatt. They're allowed to watch the stream. They are plaintiffs. Let me turn this off here in the background. Sorry. Mary, welcome to the gallery. Good to have you here as a new member. I think this doctor is doing a great job testifying. I think Mr. Anderson's obviously doing a pretty good job of asking questions here as well. So this is working well. The PTSD got in. We assume that the doctors that the testimony in the very beginning of this witness regarding the diagnosis of Johns Hopkins, of Maya and everything else, that has been excluded for some reason, and so Mr. Anderson cannot go into that. So we're not going to hear this witness testify about using those records and reading those records, those handwritten notes that we fought about this morning. It sounds like those are excluded. Looks like we're coming back here. Let's see what they have to say.
Would you like me to repeat it?
Please.
Do you have an opinion, based upon your background, training, and experience, and from your review, interview, and testing of Jack Kowalski and knowledge of his history, as to whether Jack Kowalski has post-traumatic stress disorder?
Absolutely, I do, and he does.
And can you give the jury, although you've been in detail with Maya, but give the jury an overview of how that is going to affect this man, and considering also that he no longer has a supporter's wife?
Yeah. It's the same kind of risk factors that I mentioned, or same kind of prognosis that I mentioned in regard to Maya, except with Jack. I mean, we know Jack was a deputy fire chief, and he responded to a lot of emergencies in his life, and he's seen a lot of death and destruction, and those are traumatic. But this trauma that he sustained with his daughter and then with his wife was absolutely, hands down, the worst trauma that he's ever experienced. And he's never had PTSD.
Objection. Outside the scope of his report.
What was it?
If you need to approach
outside the scope of the report. And they're going to approach again because they say that the testimony is outside the scope of this expert's report. Experts are limited to testify on those things that they've notified the other side they're going to, their findings. They have to come in and say this is what we're going to talk about, and they're saying this is outside that report. So we'll hear how they rule. They're going to review their report, see if it was mentioned or at least noticed in there to some degree. Suzanne, by the way, thanks so much. Thanks for being a safe place and wonderful place to be. Love the mods, the chat and RA. Agreeing to disagree in a respectful way is amazing. Suzanne, thank you very much for making this such a wonderful place. Wouldn't be the same without you. And I love that you have the mug there instead of your mug, you have the mug. So that was good. The question was about the father and his
Mr. Anderson.
loss of ability to get income and things like that, I think.
Where were we?
And they're overruled.
What I'd like you to do, having asked the formal question, is explain how Jack's PTSD, the degree of it, and how it's going to affect him, right, particularly in light of the fact he doesn't have Beata.
Yeah. it has affected him over the course it's been enormously stressful. He also has chronic bereavement, complicated bereavement. They're living in the same house that Beata hung herself in.
What's the deal with that? I mean, is that good or bad or what?
Well, I'm not going to say good or bad, but I can say that it's a huge reminder and a painful reminder of living with that every day. In the garage, going out, Maya going out to get in her car. She has to pass right by that place where they have a rosary hanging, where Beata hung herself. And so Jack is really geared toward, like Beata was, Jack is super geared toward raising his kids and taking care of his kids and loving them to the best of his ability. And he's really kind of in a selfless way, putting their needs above his own. And that's just kind of who he is in terms of my assessment. And, Maya's getting ready probably to leave the nest at some point in the near future, and then Kyle's right behind him. And so Jack is going to be alone, and he doesn't have his spouse. And I think
and how old is he? 60?
He's 62 or 3 or something like that.
He's not going to be hitting the bar scenes.
What's that?
He's not going to be hitting the bar scenes.
Probably not. And so, he's preoccupied. And again, PTSD keeps you preoccupied with the trauma. And he's also depressed. And so...
So how does that affect his ability to eventually develop a meaningful relationship with...
It impairs his ability to socialize and get out and date and meet new people. And even though he has a lot of support, he's certainly not had any kind of romantic life and is not interested at this point. So he's retired, and so...
Your Honor, just to renew the objections outside the scope. Overruled.
And so, PTSD, no matter what age it occurs and affects you, has negative outcome, negative implications for your health, period. Not just mental health, but physical health, as I have explained earlier. This has been overwhelming, absolutely overwhelming, and you just don't recover from this kind of a thing.
Let me ask you a little bit about Kyle Kowalski. It come to your attention that Kyle Kowalski was there in the house at the time that Beata took her life?
Yes.
And did you have the opportunity to listen to the 911 call?
I did, yes.
And did you have the opportunity to interview Kyle and test Kyle as well?
I did.
Same objections. Overruled.
And Kyle also suffers from PTSD and depressive symptoms.
I have to ask the right question.
Okay.
Do you have an opinion based upon your background, training, and ability? Do you have an opinion based upon your background, training, experience, and to a reasonable medical probability as to whether Kyle Kowalski has sustained a psychological injury, in this case, a form of PTSD or otherwise, as a result of the loss of his mother?
Yes, I do, and yes, he did.
Yes. Objection overruled.
And so, assume for the purposes of this question that Kyle stays out of the house as much as he possibly can and tries to get off to fish alone or just with a friend as often as he can, or any activity that takes him away. How does that affect your opinion on Kyle's ability to reintegrate after the loss of the core family?
Well, I think Kyle is coping in the best way that he knows how. He fishes a lot. He's very quiet and reserved, and in my view, withdrawn. He doesn't have. He has a very limited set of friends. He's not really involved in other activities in school. He's doing virtual school, and so I think he's very sad and anxious young man that will definitely be negatively affected, and he's lost his mother, and was also traumatizing for him to see what happened to Maya and to see her suffer so much.
So overall, this family group, when you have the interaction of all three people having these depressive, post-traumatic issues, what does it do to the prospects of any sort of favorable result down the road?
Yeah. What people don't understand, I think, often is that PTSD causes a wound, and even to the extent that people heal and get better, we know from a lot of studies, neurochemical studies, brain imaging studies, literally leaves a scar in the brain. The hippocampus is a part of the brain that mediates memory, and there's a high concentration of cortisol receptors. And I mentioned the stress axis, the stress system, and the response to stress. Hormone levels of cortisol go sky high in the face of these kinds of traumatic events. And it literally kills off neurons in the hippocampus. And several studies we know show that the hippocampus decreases in size in people with PTSD. So there's literally a physical scar in people who have PTSD. And there are other neurochemical problems that we know are long-lasting. And PTSD becomes biologically embedded in the body, in the brain, in the person. Literally biologically embedded. Not only, that's one example of one finding that we know about PTSD. The other thing is inflammation. And we're learning more and more and more about the neurological processes of depression and PTSD, and how these mental disorders involve alterations in the brain, right? And one of the ways, and that's a focus of a lot of research currently that overlaps with the CRPS, is inflammation. And a lot of these disorders, depression, involves higher inflammation. PTSD, inflammation. And that's thought to be the mechanism that long-term causes a higher risk of all of the leading causes of death in this country. That's how trauma and adverse childhood experiences and other traumas end up. That's the mechanism by which these traumas lead to a higher morbidity and mortality. Just getting sick and dying early is what that means, morbidity and mortality. Getting sicker sooner and dying sooner.
Now, I forgot to ask you, or if I did, maybe I'm repeating myself, but did it come to your attention that Maya had tried a number of the activities and, a job in this period since the loss of her mother, and had not kept up with them for very long? Did that come to your attention? And is this, because the juror want to know, well, she did try ice skating and she tried working at Cracker Barrel. How does her history that way affect any of your diagnoses?
I think it's evidence for the veracity or the accuracy of the diagnoses I'm making, is that her interest in and ability to interact in the ways that she did previously, has decreased. She doesn't play the piano anymore. She doesn't go to church much in the way anymore. She doesn't ice skate anymore. She doesn't do a lot of the activities. She's not involved in the clubs and the school activities that she used to be involved in. There's a lacklusterness about her, a numbing, a decrease in her interest and pleasure in getting involved in these kinds of activities.
She has been able to, though she has had a boyfriend.
She has had a boyfriend, which I think is really good. And she did get one job at Cracker Barrel, and that didn't last very long because she got triggered in many different ways, and it comes back to the PTSD and the avoidance.
Did she see somebody that
she's seeing people that remind her of Kathy Beattie and other people that she didn't have good experiences with at Hopkins. She's scared that she's going to run into people that took care of her, quote unquote, in Hopkins.
So what you're saying,
she has less energy. She has less motivation. She still has pain. and she found out that she couldn't really do all the things that she wants to do and thought she could do. But she was willing to give it a try.
Do you have an opinion based upon your background, training, and experience into a reasonable medical psychological probability as to whether both Kyle Kowalski and Jack Kowalski either have or show signs of major depressive disorder?
Same objection.
Overruled. You can answer.
Yes, they're all depressed. They're all traumatized and depressed.
Do you have an opinion based upon your background, training, and experience into a reasonable medical probability as to whether Jack Kowalski has persistent bereavement disorder, complex bereavement disorder?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
Same ruling. You can answer.
I think that he does. And again, there's a kind of preoccupation with the deceased. You can't get that person and what happened to that person and what that person did out of your mind. It becomes a kind of obsessive kind of preoccupation. And it's, there's a lot of bitterness and anger toward the loss, which is certainly somewhat understandable. And there is a lot of avoidance of the reminders. I think one thing that is evident is that Maya and Kyle, as you mentioned, take any chance they can to get out of the house and avoid the reminders. Not only does she not go to anywhere near Hopkins in Tampa, but they also avoid their own house because that's the scene of the crime, if you will. So difficulty trusting others since the death is part of the criteria of persistent complex bereavement. Feeling alone, feeling like no one understands you. Confusion about one's role in life.
Your Honor, some of this answers the question.
These are the criteria for persistent
Let's wait for our next question.
So overall, do you, for the entire family unit, what is your prognosis, favorable or unfavorable?
Unfavorable.
Your witness.
Well,
right. Turns over to
members
the
of the jury, I
defense.
think this is a good time for us to take a morning break. Please do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not do any investigation. Receive no information. Let's try to keep this to a 10-minute break.
All rise. Jurors exiting.
I'm not sure who he talks to about I don't think it's the jurors, because the jurors have never been late coming back. We're like, oh, we're not ready. It's been 10 minutes. We're not ready. We need longer. It's always the lawyers who take extra time once the jury's out, and then the jury is waiting in the hallway, waiting to come back in. I don't know about the taxation question. About some states tax settlement money differently or don't tax settlement money, I think.
Read out of our presence, Doctor. You're in the middle of your testimony, so you can't talk to either side. You feel free to go take a break. Is there anything we need to address before we go on our break?
If the court has the opportunity, I'd like the court to peruse Trial Exhibit 233A32, which is the doctor's conclusion in his medical examination report as to his opinions regarding Dr. Kassenstein and Dr. Cabot.
I don't have it, so someone's going to have to put it up.
We will put it up.
Everyone can be seated, or you can go on a break, or whatever you want to do.
Everybody just do what you want to do.
As a reminder, I do have a hard stop at 11:55 this morning. So if we're still with this witness, he's going to have to come back after lunch. And you can go to the restroom and all that good stuff.
Okay, so now we're going to take a break while the judge still reviews. The judge wants a break. He was literally standing up, ready to go out the door, saying, do you guys have anything? Hand on the doorknob. And they're like, yes, as a matter of fact, we do. Mandy, how much time does the plaintiff have left? Not much. I think we have 50 hours total, and I think they're pushing 30 right now. To give you an idea, the defense is like approaching 15 to 20 in that range, if I remember right. And they haven't even started their case yet. So the plaintiff needs quite a bit of time just to do cross-examination and, rebuttal and everything else. M. Young, thank you. I was thinking that one of the states do not tax personal injury settlements, and maybe Florida. That's a big win. That's huge if they don't get taxed on that. All right, just one time, can't Anderson not have something? Says Olga. He's got a lot. They've got a lot of stuff they haven't done. Peter Steele says, I think it's 60 hours each. That's a ton. I thought when he reached 24 or something, we heard the judge say halfway. or Mr. Anderson say halfway. That's why we think it's 50. Does that include closing statement? I think closing statement's already like sort of blocked out for them, and they have equal time on those. I think that's been reserved. Okay, I'm going to listen in on the Zoom side, and I can't let you guys hear this. Sorry. Hang on one second. So they're still arguing about an opinion of him reviewing the other doctor's notes and saying they breached the standard of care. I could verbatim reply because that's allowed. I can tell you what I hear as long as I don't play it for you. So this is Mr. This defense speaking right here. It's a standard of care opinion that he's prohibited from giving. Anderson says we're not asking for that. The question will be, what is the diagnosis, psychological factors affecting the medical conditions, and what does it indicate about the patient and her underlying organic physical conditions? It will not be a question about whether the doctors at Johns Hopkins failed to do the standard of care. We think it's important because the jury needs to have a view from the plaintiff's experts, psychiatrist, as to what this diagnosis is. They've already asked, I believe, in a jury question about the DSM-5. They're not going to have the opportunity, but they should be allowed an explanation of what this diagnosis that appears in the Johns Hopkins medical record is. That I'm just repeating verbatim what I hear on the Zoom. And it's difficult. It's Mr. Whitney who is talking, not Mr. Anderson, sorry, but they're arguing about during the break. Yes, I can hear. This is not sidebar. This is during break, and it's open discussion. The camera is not shown because the judge has stood up. And well, now he's seated, but still the camera's not showing it. So... Okay. Someone asked a question about which feed am I watching for the missile attacks in the Israel Gaza situation, and I was watching Reuters. Reuters has a cameraman on top of a very tall building, and they're filming missiles being launched and rockets being launched and missiles landing, and they've just planes have just strafed a harbor. I think I can show you this one briefly. Let's see. They just strafed a harbor and blew up a boat right there, and it's been burning and sinking. Anyway, so I'm watching a war on one side and a battle on the other. So it's a spicy day all around. Anyway, they're still arguing about standard of care. Judge is still talking about that. Now we finally get to take a break. They get a 5-minute break now. Yeah. Okay, so now the judge just left the courtroom, and so now we have about 5 minutes left before they come back. All right. Cindy's Crazy says, reminds me of the U.S. action in the 90s when we were watching reporters talking from hotel rooms and showing explosions out their windows. Seriously. We're live streaming war now, which is something that, we never would have thought of, way back in the day. But ever since about the 90s, that became a thing. I've debated showing some of this because I've got all sorts of sources that I monitor. I've got some live feeds, some maps that are updated quite quickly that show everywhere missiles are striking. I've got the plane feeds overhead where I can watch sometimes military planes circling and flying over, and we watch the war while we're on break. I've been thinking about that. I just wondered. I think I'd have to have a completely separate channel to do that. I can't show it. I'm not sure how I could keep Pickles Not Politics and show war, because war is about as political as it gets. So. We'll have to start a second channel to do that, but it's completely separate. Yeah, I will tell you this: it's heartbreaking. the suffering that happens on both sides. And I'm not here to say who is right and who is wrong. I do have my own opinions, but war is hell. And I don't wish anybody to go through that. Hopefully there's, a peaceful outcome can be reached soon. Let's see. Yeah, we're sticking with courts here. We're sticking to courts. It would be a different channel if we did war. I mean, literally, I would have a different channel on YouTube. Yeah, Carol, CNN's taking the Reuters feed, I believe. We would have a lot of trolls if you did. Oh, yes, we would have tons of trolls. They get so bad. Motion to start a new channel. If I did, I probably wouldn't even mention it on this one, honestly, because the content is so different, that the discussion would be so different that I'd want to be completely separate. All right. As far as the testimony we've heard so far, the cross-examination is going to be interesting because as many wins as the defense has had this morning in their objections, and they've won almost every single objection with this doctor, with Dr. Brewerton. As many wins as they've had, they now have to walk carefully through the minefield that they've sort of laid, right? They want to get in the cross. But if they ask a question where the answer opens the door, then suddenly something that was ruled out before is now in. So opening the door is a real risk for the defense here, because they have to navigate the same minefield that everybody else does, that the plaintiff has to navigate. So Shapiro asking the questions. I'm pretty sure that's probably going to happen today. He's been the one objecting, so I think he's going to do the questioning, and it's going to be... It's going to be probably spicy. They need to get some wins here. They can't just let the plaintiff have this witness be a big W on the plaintiff side. So they need to try to do as much as they can to sort of whittle away at what they just heard. I mean, you heard what they objected to when they were talking about the diagnosis for the families and their PTSD and ongoing, how this will affect them for the rest of their lives and how they need treatment probably for the rest of their lives, and the impacts of just all the triggers and things that are around them, and how difficult this will be for the family going forward. This all goes to damages, right?
Cloned before a second channel.
Who said that? I need to be cloned. Yes, because I have to be here. I can't be gone.
How many times would the defense say DCF orders?
A lot, Mandy, because there's a huge shield. There's a huge umbrella, a protective umbrella that surrounds the defense when it comes to the DCF orders, and that's that Part 39 or Title 39. I forget what the title is. The immunity that shields them, and they are trying to hide behind that shield as much. They're trying to fit as much of their actions under that shield as they can, and the more they can protect and keep from being, vulnerable to the attacks of the plaintiff, the better it is for them financially. All right, I appreciate you guys keeping focused on this trial. I apologize, shouldn't have brought up the little side video that I was watching. Let's try to keep that out. Yes, Amber says, I know. Recovery Addict started it. Let's drop the topic, please. Yes, let's do that. Let's drop the topic. Let's see. What are your thoughts on the witness himself? How would he handle this cross? I think the witness was prepared to testify and spill the beans, like say everything. He was going to be a slam dunk type witness as far as the plaintiff was concerned, and the defense objections have sort of neutered a lot of their sorry to use that analogy, but neutered his testimony in a huge way, where some of the things that he really wanted to testify on and would be very impactful and helpful for the plaintiff now got cut out. So we know that the witness was prepared to testify this. We know that cross-examination is coming, and cross-examination usually does sort of get into areas that that were borderline to what the direct was on. is the witness going to be able to properly answer the question and open the door with what happens here on cross? And if so, what happens on redirect? He's a little bit long-winded. He likes to speak continuously. That's probably the professor in him, where he lectures probably for a great deal of time. The doctor put down Johns Hopkins a lot. Johns Hopkins, yes, he did. Really made them look bad. But a lot of the worst parts of what he could have testified to, or what the plaintiff wanted him to testify to, he didn't get in. And that was all about this misdiagnosis and how early they knew and how often they knew and what they should have done. He said he knew he wanted to go into this profession pretty early on. So early in college, he started focusing on this. And then when he got like 4 degrees, he's quadruple judges the back. Here we go.
Seated, everybody.
Hang on just 1 second.
Okay, when we come back with the jury, are you going to continue, Mr. Anderson, or is it going to the defense?
I asked those 2 questions, as I previously stated, and it will be for the record, so nobody objects. Doctor, in this case, there was a diagnosis of psychological factors affecting other medical conditions. Please explain this diagnosis, psychological factors affecting other medical
Mr.
conditions.
Anderson, we already did without the doctor in our presence, so that's okay. Unless you're changing what we discussed.
I am.
No, he said unless you are.
Oh, no, you're fine.
He's trying to make a record for the record, but there's already a record.
I guess I need to watch my pronouns, the we, meaning you. Anything before we bring in the jury?
No, Your Honor.
Let's take the...
Your Honor, just very briefly, we just want to renew the motion to strike the testimony regarding the PTSD diagnoses of Jack Kowalski and Kyle Kowalski, as no formal exams were ever done by Dr. Brewer.
So the court's going to continue its rulings. Let's bring on the jury. Yes, sir.
So they're going to push that button again. They want to strike that the ruling, strike the testimony about the Jack and Kyle diagnoses. All right, here we go. Let's see, let me actually switch to this one here and then pause this one for just a second.
All rise, jurors entering.
Jurors entering.
Okay, please be seated, everybody. Members of the jury, I want to confirm while you're away, you did not discuss this case amongst yourselves. You did no investigation and you received no information. Is that all correct? Correct. And that you did not see any media coverage about this case since you were last with us? Correct. And no one's approached you about this case. Is that correct? Correct. Mr. Anderson.
Dr. Brewerton, in this case, the jury may hear a diagnosis of psychological factors affecting other medical conditions. Can you explain this diagnosis, that is, psychological factors affecting other medical conditions, what it means?
Sure. Yes, psychological factors affecting medical disorders is a DSM bona fide diagnosis made by Dr. Katzenstein in the record at Hopkins. And it's diagnosed when a medical condition, a known diagnosed medical condition, is adversely affected by psychological or behavioral factors. Attitudes and behaviors regarding illness or co-present with the illness can affect the course of the illness. And we've talked about how depression and pain is a subjective thing, and depression and pain often go together, and depression and anxiety can certainly alter the course of how one perceives one's condition.
Doctor, does it confirm or conflict with a physical condition?
It confirms a physical condition. It's diagnosed when there is a bona fide physical condition already diagnosed.
Can you tell us then how, well, I think I just asked you that same question, but how does it conflict with or contradict a diagnosis of conversion disorder in Maya Kowalski, if such had actually been made?
It conflicts.
Objection, Your Honor, single objection.
Overruled, you can answer that.
Yeah, they're incompatible with each other. It conflicts. You're acknowledging the presence of a general medical condition, in this case, complex regional pain syndrome, and that there are psychological factors that affect the course of complex regional. And so with conversion, it's the disorder isn't real, or it's not caused by organic factors.
Your witness. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, so those additional questions were added on after the objection during the break, or after the discussion during the break. Now we're going to cross, so we haven't had cross until now.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon. It's still morning, though.
It's been a long day. Okay. Good morning. So, your charges to be here today, we haven't discussed those yet. What do you charge?
I charge $400 a day. I'm sorry, $400 an hour. And for a day, $4,000.
Okay, you were here all day yesterday?
Yes.
And did you charge $4,000 for that?
I haven't done my invoice yet.
Okay. Doctor, you're going to submit a bill.
I haven't decided. I'm going to discuss it with the plaintiff's attorneys.
Doctor, your typical charges for being in court are $4,000 a day.
Yeah.
So you have that for today, correct?
Yes.
And your typical charge would be for yesterday as well, correct?
This is not typical. This whole experience and coming to hear testimony all day is not typical. I've never done that before.
At the time of your deposition, at least, you had also put 71 hours into the case, correct?
Correct.
And so if we're doing that, as my partner, Mr. Hunter, says, there'll be no math, but 71 hours times $400 an hour would be $28,000.
Right.
Plus the time that you prepared to get ready to come testify, correct?
Correct.
Fair to say we're in excess of $40,000 at this point, true?
True.
About 20 to 40% of the work you do is done to testify in court, true?
It's forensic work. It's not necessarily testifying. Usually most things don't go to trial or into court.
It's for a legal basis?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in terms of baseline assessment, you do agree there's nothing in Maya Kowalski's record before she went to All Children's Hospital on October 7th, 2016, that would count as a thorough baseline assessment of her, true?
What kind of an assessment?
A thorough assessment to see if she had, for example, PTSD for all of the medical treatments that she underwent prior to going to All Children's. There's no baseline assessment for that, is there?
She had assessment by Rebecca Johnson, a counselor.
Okay. Well, I'll get back to that. Well, actually, let's talk about that first, then I'll get back to my question. Rebecca Johnson diagnosed pre-existing anxiety and depression, correct?
Right. Adjustment disorder.
Okay. So, just so it's clear for this jury, prior to anything that my client did or didn't do, Maya Kowalski had a diagnosis of anxiety, depression, and adjustment disorder, correct?
She had adjustment disorder with mixed emotions.
And you also saw, did you not, in reviewing Ms. Johnson's records, that she had anxiety and depression related to her pain?
Yes.
Okay. And that was all before she ever entered All Children's Hospital, true?
Correct.
And getting back to the question I asked you, nobody, no psychiatrist, no psychologist, nobody at the request of the Kowalski family ever had a psychiatrist evaluate Maya to see if she suffered from PTSD, correct?
There was no psychiatrist that did that. but I think in the general course of being assessed for clinical care, people genuinely, routinely ask about trauma. And so generally that's a gate question, and if people answer that they've had some sort of a trauma, then people ask the questions about PTSD symptoms. But there was no history given of any major trauma other than having the illness, CRPS, prior to Hopkins.
Well, you testified to this jury a moment ago about all your methodology and the questions and the questionnaires that you require before you can come to this diagnosis. That was never done before, true?
This is a forensic assessment. That's correct. No forensic assessment to this detail had ever been done before.
So I understand your testimony. There is no forensic assessment of Maya Kowalski prior to her going to All Children's that you can compare with what you found, true?
It's true, but part of the forensic assessment looks at the whole life history of traumas and when those traumas occurred. And there was no indication of prior major traumas other than having complex regional pain syndrome prior to Hopkins.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. You told the jury freely that your understanding of complex regional pain syndrome is it's a lifetime debilitating condition that deals with the most extreme pain known to man, correct?
Correct.
And you're certainly not denying to this jury that having that condition that you believe she had prior to going to All Children's is going to affect a patient severely psychologically, correct?
It can.
Okay. Well, it did for Maya, didn't it?
To some extent, yes.
Right, because it wasn't just that she had CRPS before she went to All Children's. She had been in a wheelchair for over a year, correct?
Correct.
She had gone to Chicago for treatment, right?
Correct.
She had undergone 40 hyperbaric oxygen therapy inside a chamber, right?
Correct.
She also had over 60 ketamine infusions that caused, some of which caused hallucinations, correct?
Correct.
And she also was taken to a foreign country and put in a ketamine coma for 5 days, correct?
She volunteered. She wasn't taken. She went with her family and with informed consent and participated in that procedure. Yes.
A procedure that a child at the age of 9 was told was a 50-50 risk of death. True?
That's what I'm informed by.
And you're not, are you telling this jury that in light of all of that, Maya had no built-in trauma before she went to All Children's? None of that affected her psychologically?
When I say trauma, I'm talking about a criterion A trauma in the DSM-5. Life is, let me finish, please. Life is traumatic, and there's a distinction between stress and trauma. And trauma is defined best by the 3 E's. It's not just an event. It's also the experience of the event and whether there are adverse effects from the experience of that event. That's what really defines a stressor as being traumatic, or an event as being traumatic. And she had the support of her family. This was something they all agreed to. They went into it knowing the risk, and it has to be balanced with the intensity of her pain and the lack of response to other treatments.
You saw that her quality of life before she went to All Children's was 0. Are you saying that didn't have a traumatic effect on her?
It could have.
Let me ask you about some of the assessments that you did of Maya.
Okay.
After the fact. Do you have your testing with you, doctor, or no?
My testimony? No.
I'm sorry, doctor. Do you have your testing with you?
No.
Okay. I'm happy to just to establish that the evaluation that you did on Maya was February of 2022, correct?
The evaluation was in.
Report, sorry.
Yes, okay. That's right.
Do you remember having Maya fill out a score sheet on activities in the state of her health at the time?
Yes.
And she reported to you when you asked her whether she had any problems with walking, running, sports, exercise, lifting something heavy or doing chores around the house, how much of a problem that was either never or almost never, correct?
If that's what's on there, yeah.
Okay. You are aware, in having sat here in court yesterday, that Maya Kowalski testified that she had no signs or symptoms of CRPS relapse for 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, correct?
Correct.
And so, in terms of how she did after coming out of All Children's, you are aware that she became president of her class?
Yes.
You're aware that she became president of several clubs, including Students Against Tobacco?
Okay.
You're aware that she has a boyfriend?
Yes.
You're aware that she had a job?
Yes.
You're aware that she traveled to New York City for film festivals?
Yes.
You're aware that her plans are to, I think she said her horizons for college were broadening. Not just FSU or Duke, but maybe New York City for college. You heard her say that, didn't you?
I did hear that.
One moment, bro. Her grades were impeccable after she got out of All Children's, true?
True.
I mean, she can't do much better than number 1 in the class, can she?
From that perspective, that doesn't mean she's not suffering with a mental illness.
Yeah, I'm talking about her function in everyday life. She's excelling in school, true?
Therefore, she doesn't have a problem?
I'm asking about her grades. She's excelling.
Yeah, she
in
did.
school.
She did real. She's very smart. She did well. She's persistent. Never give up.
I don't have any other questions at this time.
But she doesn't actually go to school, does she?
No. She's
Does
been in
home courses.
That's right.
And stays away from interactions other than submitting things on the internet.
Correct. I also think that her teachers were quite aware of her journey and have been flexible with her in terms of doing her schoolwork.
These different associations and things, weren't those things where she didn't actually go to anything? She just was part of a chat room or submitted things online to be part of it?
I'm not sure.
And so, what are the 3 E's you were discussing again? Event, experience?
Event, experience, and effects.
Okay.
And it's important distinction when you're talking about whether something is traumatic or not. We all experience traumatic events, but that doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily adversely affect us. It depends on what our experience is of those events. A hurricane, for example. Many people in this room, there was a hurricane here, and that was an event. But people had very different experiences of the hurricane and very different effects of the hurricane. Drastically different. And some people were traumatized, therefore, by the hurricane, and many people were not at all. Right? And that's true for any kind of trauma that there is, traumatic event. Right? And so that's why it's so important to talk about the 3 E's and really as a more in-depth and full experience of what, or definition of what trauma really is. And this comes out of SAMHSA. This was published over a decade ago in terms of defining trauma. The Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration that oversees all mental health and substance abuse treatment facilities in the country. This is their definition of that.
Maya's very, very intelligent, is she not?
She is.
She is nonetheless still a teenager.
Correct.
Her perceptions of her life may or may not be accurate when it comes to the future and what's truly going on as a teenager.
Correct.
And the Kowalskis, in fact, did hire a psychiatrist to evaluate and to treat Maya, independent of anything else, Dr. Henschke, did they not?
That's correct.
No further questions?
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Members of the jury, do any of you have any
We're
questions?
hearing paper tear. There's a couple. Okay, so Mr. Anderson did cut it short. Now we're into split time with the jury asking questions. This will be divided between the plaintiff and the defense. Number of questions being handed over, a number of sheets of questions.
Okay, members of the jury, it looks like there's quite a few, so
Out you go. Jury, you know the routine.
I'm not gonna say go to your room, but we'll see in a few minutes. Do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not do any investigation and receive no information.
Okay. So the jury is leaving. We're hoping they leave the mics on like they did before.
The jury is out of our presence. Dr. Brewerton, if you could so kindly step outside so we could go over these without you knowing about them.
Judge is stacking everything up and unfolding things.
Okay. This is, let's go with red number 1.
Red 2.
Upper left-hand corner of the questions that remain on this. Oh, there's only one that remains. In your professional opinion, does the PTSD Maya experiences result from negative events? And I should say that Dr. Brewerton, out of our presence, in your professional opinion, does the PTSD Maya experiences result from negative events that she experienced, not the direct result of the Munchausen by proxy diagnosis?
That's going to happen.
Yeah, we have to object to this one.
I don't object because that was something I thought was going to come up. It was a question that the jury would have, and I think the jury should be able to answer the jury's inquiry. That is a perfectly legitimate question.
The Munchausen by proxy diagnosis is not as to Maya.
It's a pediatric hospital. And he can explain that. And it's a pediatric hospital.
Ooh, I wonder if the judge allows this.
In the fear that it's going to open the door for opinions that have been precluded by the court.
He's been instructed ad nauseam not to get anywhere near that.
It's going to open the door. How can the jury open the door? I don't think they can.
Perhaps we'll allow it, and perhaps Mr. Anderson can again remind him before he takes the stand again.
He's going to allow it.
Avoid.
Mr. Shapiro's not a big fan of that.
Okay.
You stay away from any standard of care or other such arguments and stick strictly to causation. If I'm understanding everyone here.
I'm going to crank the audio just a bit.
Number 2, red number 2. How much did you review Beata and her state of mind during Maya's ordeals? Next question. What are the 3 major depression incidents you refer to?
Good shot, red 2. I think that's fair.
I have something along those lines.
No objection to number 2. In terms of number 1, he obviously never evaluated Beata, and there's nothing in his report that talks about what Beata's state of mind was at the time, so the undisclosed opinion.
Let me suggest something that I was hoping to bring up. Dr. Brewerton did, in fact, if you read his report, evaluate Beata, and we have Dr. Richards. I am running out of time, and I think that if the parties are so inclined, the court more so inclined, I think Dr. Brewerton can cover quite a bit and it's not that much of what Dr. Richards would have to say, and I prefer not to have to call Dr. Richards because I don't have time for Dr. Richards. So perhaps by answering this question, he could cover an area, and I won't have an extra witness to deal with. Wow.
Oh man, they killed the audio. They're objecting, saying it wasn't in his report. They're going to preview the question with the witness before the jury comes in. So maybe a proffer. The next question from the jury: does Kyle have symptoms of PTSD, anger, depression? Defense is objecting to this one. The court's maintaining the same position, and he's allowing that one. Next page. Do you still follow with Milo and her family for any follow-up questions or sessions? In your testimony, you were asked about Maya being tested for PTSD before going to all children's. Are you saying she did not trigger a response in evaluations that would require a PTSD evaluation? Judge is confused about the question, not sure if something is crossed out or a word. In later evaluations, they misspelled later. No objections from the defense. On one, on the other one, they do say they object. Dr. Lewis was excluded from testifying on this report, so I think both the plaintiff and the defense did a good job of not raising an issue that would have triggered a violation, but the first question will. So Anderson says he doesn't think the court's intent was to diminish the doctor's position and make it sound as though he's not doing his job. It was a technical violation as to, I guess, us, and not getting approval beforehand. And the honest answer is yes, he did, as long as he's instructed not to say anything further. He's already testified that yes, he stayed up with Maya in his direct examination, and he asked him, have you stayed with Maya? And he said yes. He should be able to answer that as long as he doesn't go into the details of it. He's not allowed to put in results. So the judge agrees with Mr. Anderson on this one. It would be the subject, the content of that follow-up. You come and answer the answer that he's got. I'll ask the next question, then I'll preview that with him before the jury comes in. So defense, to make a record, they want his answer to be yes or no. Judge agrees. Judge says, well, if you want to ask him follow-ups, we can. And defense says that we won't. Next, page number 5, red 5. During the time with the Kowalskis, has it been brought up why they wanted to reside in the home where tragedy occurred in? Is it that where his family is? Mom raised us here. My wife and I are raising a family here. School here. Positive reasoning, or some or all Kowalskis would rather move from the house but don't have the means to make a move. So they're asking about why they're staying in the home. Objection. Or no objection, says defense. The problem is the means question. Judge says, why don't I just ask the open-ended question and let him answer instead of giving all the results or all the possible options? Has it been brought up why they, one or all, want to reside in the home where tragedy occurred in? And he's going to leave it there. So that's how he's going to amend that question. Next question, next page, red 6. No, I was not a spy in a former life. Does a Munchausen by proxy diagnosis apply to the parent or the child? Have you ever met Beata? How many recordings did you hear by minute? How many videos did you hear by minute? Did you subpoena her electronic accounts and sent emails, text logs, Facebook accounts, vlogs? You mentioned complicated bereavement. What percentage of the PTSD is from Johns Hopkins Hospital versus CRPS versus parental suicide? Given the number of treatment centers involved in similar perspectives, what percentage of blame would you assign to Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital versus each of the other treatment centers? Defense is not like this. There's that page. Hands that to the judge. Or hands that to Mr. Anderson. Defense says, I'll start with the objection to the last question because, again, I don't think you can answer that question without blurring the lines of DCFS versus all children's. That's also the ultimate province of the jury to decide what percentage of any settlement is assigned or any judgment is assigned to Hopkins. 90.704, an expert may testify to the ultimate issue of a case, says Anderson. In this case, they did not mention anything about DCF that was not brought in, and I would think the defense would want that question, frankly, because it's the only way that you're not going to get hit with all of it. Anderson thinks it should be given. What's the next one, he says? Defense goes back. Shapiro, just to make the record, we'd ask the jury to be instructed that all children's hospital is not responsible for the separation of Maya Kowalski from her parent, and that's the problem with this question at times. Anderson says at times, there are 3 different times, Shapiro. From the period of dependency on October 13th, I know that that's the problem with this question. It's just going to open the door, and its entire report was based on the fact that there was medical kidnapping by all children's, and for the basis of one question, we can cause a mistrial with this witness. That's okay. So wow. I'm trying to get as much of this as I can. Does this help at all, or am I just confusing the issue with my one voice being all 3 people? Is there any objections to this page of questions, says the judge?
That was great verbal transcription, Scott.
I do this in the car sometimes when I'm listening to talk radio. I just repeat everything I hear. They're saying there's no foundation. The medical malpractice count about that, says Mr. Anderson. Evidentiary. They're mumbling here. I'll try. Shapiro, the defense objects to anything below this. The first question he wants to address about Munchausen applying to the parent of the child and what its basis is in terms of what he reviewed in terms of Beata. Judge says, so you're suggesting basically the last 2 questions be out, and the first question would be what percentage of the PTSD is from J. Hatch versus CRPS versus parental suicide? Defense says we object to that. Anderson says we do not. Judge says, I'm going to agree with the defense. Those last 2 questions will be out. But the balance is okay. You guys are so bad. So the evaluation questions about Beata seem to be in. See if that's all of our questions. The falsetto Tiny Tim voice. Do you guys see the guy that does the Tiny Tim voice on YouTube? Anderson says he wouldn't be able to subpoena anything. Has he been able to see, hear any of that? He really wasn't tasked to do that, although he did some of it. So I'm not sure, Judge. I don't think the bottom here about did you subpoena electronic accounts and all that he wouldn't have the ability to do that, but he could answer about the Munchausen by proxy at the top. Judge says, so you're saying, did you subpoena her for subpoena her electronic accounts, blah, 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 should be out? Anderson, yes. Defense, Shapiro, yes, that's fair. Also, all this is out as well, says Mr. Anderson. Judge says, okay, we good. Everything good on this one, or good to move on to the next one? The next one, you mentioned Maya is sheltered and withdrawn. Is Maya an extrovert or introvert? What percentage of people who engage your services are diagnosed
On this one, are we good to move on to the next one?
Now we can hear it. Oh, man. I thought we had voice coming in. What percentage of her, and I assume Maya, disposition to suicide is due to CRPS versus parental suicide versus hospital trauma? What percentage of blame for Beata's suicide is due to her disposition versus the improper claim of Munchausen? And I think the her there is Beata on that one. Defense says we object to the last question. Defense says, plaintiff says, we don't. Clearly, it's an issue the jury is concerned about. Next one up from the bottom, what percentage something versus hospital? That seems completely appropriate here, too. What percentage of people engaged in services are diagnosed with disorders? I don't understand it, but I don't see a harm in it. The judge says, we don't have the jury here, so you can speak in normal tones. Shapiro says, we object to the last two. Certainly the last one talks about his evaluation of Beata, which he never did, and assigning percentages, which we object to the second to last one on the same basis. Judge says, I'm going to sustain those two. Now this page, we're at number 7, is the same person as read number 6. No. Who's our alternate number 6 on the jury? Okay. Lots of chatter. They're like, haha, we don't want to exclude them all, but theoretically possible, says Shapiro. Judge says, I will ask the first few down to what percentage of people who engage your services are diagnosed with this disorder. It says state or issue. Honestly, I don't understand. And defense says, we object to that on that premises. It's the guy on the end. We're never going to get to him. Judge says, I'll agree with that one, but I'll leave in the, you mentioned Maya is sheltered withdrawn. Is she an introvert or an extrovert? Defense says that's okay. Judge says, let's bring in Dr. Brewertrin. We'll go over these few questions. Anderson says, can you do the warn first? Judge says, I'll let you warn him. Why don't you do it now? So Mr. Anderson is turning to go warn him now. Wait. All right. So now I think we're going to get the audio back. Yeah, so this warning is very important because he says the wrong thing and we end up in a mistrial and it ends up, and we all go back to go. Do not collect $200. We have to start over. Goodman Law says, I'm flabbergasted that the judge won't allow the witness to testify the percentage that can be attributed to Johns Hopkins. That's the whole point of this testimony. Yes, but the jury is the one that's supposed to decide those percentages, right? When it comes to assigning damages. I think I could have done a better job with the voices if I had the volume a little higher, but then you would have been able to hear it, and I don't want that to happen. All right. I think we're waiting for defense to instruct Dr. Brewerton as to what to not say. And once that's done, we're going to bring Dr. Brewerton in without the jury. The judge is going to ask a couple questions. Some of them are going to be very, very specific yes/no questions. Looks like the judge is going to talk to them, preview these questions with him right now. So he's back now. He's walking back in. The feed's just a little late. On Zoom, he's already back up on the stand. Jury is very engaged. The jury apportions liability. That's one of their tasks.
Oh, you can have a seat. What the lawyers just went over with you, there's a couple of questions that the jury has that I want to preview to make sure before I make my final ruling. Here's a question. How much did you review Beata and her state of mind during Maya's ordeals?
I reviewed all the information in regard to that.
What specifically?
The statements in the record, in the Hopkins record, about her presentation to the hospital.
Yeah, this is right on the line.
Suicide note, her diary entries, some of the text messages. I've certainly talked with Jack about that at the time. I've reviewed the therapy records that on Beata prior to the Hopkins admission. It was done, I believe, by Michelle Rogers and initially by Rebecca Johnson, who referred them to Michelle Rogers. So a number of things I think that are relevant to her state of mind.
Any follow-up, Mr. Shapiro, on that?
Well, more of a legal argument.
Okay. Here's the next question, Dr. Brewerton. The question is, do you still follow with Maya and her family for any follow-up sessions? Are you able to answer that in a yes/no fashion?
No. I am able to answer it, and the answer is no, because I'm not her clinician, I'm not her doctor.
Okay. So I think that answer is fine.
I'm not sure the doctor understands the question. The question is about whether he has had contact with Maya.
No, the question is, do you still follow with Maya and her family for any follow-up sessions?
Oh, as a doctor.
Yeah, in what capacity? As an expert, I did follow up. But I'm not her treating physician. I'm not her treating psychiatrist. But in terms of evaluation for the purposes of the court,
so that switches the answer.
Follow up.
Any objection to the answers that?
Yeah. No, as long as he doesn't get into the substance of it.
I mean,
in light of the court's ruling, we've already made our case on that.
I mean, respectfully, his first answer was the correct answer. He doesn't follow it. And the problem is after some coaching.
Okay. Here's the thing. I've made some rulings with respect to what can and can't come in, and so I just needed to hear what it was going to be, because I want to make sure that your answers aren't going to cause a mistrial in this case.
Yeah,
so I think it's better for me not to ask the question, and I will sustain the defenses.
When you asked me, I assumed they meant as a clinician.
I know, but it has nothing to do with you. It's just rulings I've made previously in the case. So I'll tell the jury I can't ask that question. Now, going back to the other one about the state of mind.
Right. So the Dr. Brewerton was proffered entirely as to Maya, her future needs, and some opinions that are excluded. There's nothing in his 37-page report that gives a diagnosis of Beata. And so this is far outside the scope of what he's been disclosed for and the scope of this opinion.
Well, this question doesn't ask for an opinion, though. It just asks if he reviewed Beata's state of mind. It doesn't ask for an opinion.
Right, so then whether he reviewed it or not would not be relevant to the opinion that he's proffering.
We believe it would be, obviously, as to the effect it had on Kyle, Jack, and Maya.
Well, if I allow it, though, you're still not going to be able to get any or elicit any opinions. Do you understand that?
Well, I do. Absent, I would ask you, counsel, for an ability to broaden his scope a little bit, so I wouldn't have to bring another expert in. But if that's not happening, then
it's not happening.
All right.
Well, okay. So I'm going to allow the question, but there's not going to be no opinions.
Right, and there'll likely be no. Well, I understand.
Okay. I will remind you in front of the presence of the jury that you're still under oath. I just kind of wanted to give you the heads up. Okay, let's bring in the jury. Remember, I have an 11:55 hard stop.
You have 22 minutes. Make it happen.
How long is that going to last, Judge?
It's a fine tie.
Well, it's just a lunch meeting.
Okay.
He's just
I'll
got
be back
lunch.
at the normal time.
He's got lunch.
It's just, since I'm chairing the meeting, I've got to be there on time.
Yes.
One would say if you're chairing the meeting, you have control of it.
He's headed down to Cafe Zupa's, going to get some of that wonderful Wisconsin cauliflower soup, which I may or may not be willing to commit a crime for. I wish I had it in this area.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Please be seated. Members of the jury, I want to confirm while you're away, you did not discuss this case amongst yourselves. You did no investigation and received no information. Is that all correct? Correct. And you did not see any media coverage about this case. And no one has approached you about this case. Yeah. Now, members of the jury, there's going to be some questions I can ask and some that I cannot. And so if I do not ask the question, you just know that I'm not able to ask the question. Dr. Brewerton. Oh, and the same thing goes as with prior. Dr. Brewerton was outside when I reviewed these with the lawyers.
And he's still under oath.
The jury wants to know, in your professional opinion, does PTSD that Maya experiences result from negative events that she experienced, not the direct result of the Munchausen by proxy diagnosis?
Yes.
Okay. How much did you review Beata and her state of mind during Maya's ordeals?
I reviewed a lot of information regarding that, not only the records at Johns Hopkins, but her treatment records with Michelle Rogers and Rebecca Johnson. I reviewed records from other hospitals, what they said about Beata and her interaction with staff there. I've looked at diary entries. I looked at her suicide note. I've heard audio tapes. I looked at text messages. So all of the information that I was given, a lot of it did apply to Beata's state of mind.
Next question from the jury. What are the 3 major depression incidents that you refer to?
There's one episode before her admission to Johns Hopkins which she was getting better from at the time that she was around the time, and that had to do with her CRPS getting better. And then after the death of her mother and the hospitalization at Hopkins, there was another episode. And then the third one has to do when she relapsed in 2020, November of 2020. And those are that's the third one. And to what extent the third, overlaps with the second is not clear. But those are 3 distinct periods where she was significantly depressed.
Dr. Brewerton, does Kyle Kowalski have symptoms of PTSD, anger, or depression?
Yes, all of the above. He meets criteria for DSM-5 for PTSD, recurrent major depression, or simply major depression. And yes, he's angry.
The next question, in your testimony, you were asked about Maya Kowalski being tested for PTSD before going to All Children's. Are you saying she did not trigger a response in later evaluations that would require a PTSD evaluation?
If I understand the question correctly, there was no evidence of PTSD prior to her admission to Hopkins. There was evidence of PTSD by other independent providers that were not privy to my evaluation, and those included Rebecca Johnson, who said that she had PTSD, and also Dr. Henschke, the psychiatrist that testified, I think, earlier in the trial. She independently diagnosed her with PTSD as well. I think that's it.
Okay. Next question, has it been brought up why they, meaning the Kowalskis, one or all, desired to reside in the home that tragedy occurred in?
I think they're certainly considering moving. I don't know that they want to stay there. I think they've been so preoccupied with the events after Beata's death and with Maya and with the trial and the lawsuit. And they have a life here. They've been here a while and they have a life here. And I think once this is over, they would very well consider moving. They've considered it, but for any number of factors have not done it. I think as a result, they avoid being there as much as possible, particularly the kids. But I think Jack is definitely considering getting out of the house. They want to.
The next question is, does a Munchausen by proxy diagnosis apply to the parent or the child?
Munchausen by proxy applies to the parent. However, there were diagnoses of factitious disorder for Maya. So that's an important point. In the discharge summary,
I think you've answered the question. Have you ever met Beata?
No.
Okay. Did you?
I had no involvement with the Kowalskis prior to being asked to consult on this case.
Have you reviewed any recordings or how many recordings did you hear by minute from Beata Kowalski?
I heard by minute. I would ballpark maybe 50 to 60 minutes, including phone calls to Beata at Hopkins, but other ones as well in terms of videos taken by the family and also exams of Maya by Dr. Kirkpatrick. That's all the ones I can think of right now.
Well, you might have answered the next question, is how many videos did you review by minute?
Oh, okay. An hour or two, something on that order.
Okay. The next question, you mentioned that Maya Kowalski is sheltered and withdrawn. Is Maya Kowalski an extrovert or introvert?
Well, I didn't formally assess that. There are certain assessment instruments to assess whether someone is introverted or extroverted. My impression, though, is that she was much more extroverted before going to Hopkins. And I think that can be kind of confused with depression, because depression kind of makes one more introverted relative. They're more withdrawn, more to oneself, less reaching out. And again, part of that is the anxiety and discomfort and fear and distrust that comes out of PTSD.
Members of the jury, I've asked all the questions that I'm going to be able to ask. Mr. Anderson.
He has to be careful not to go into some of these areas he wants to.
I don't think I've got any questions.
Good job.
No questions, sir. Thank you.
And good job from the
And may
defense.
he be excused?
He may. I'm not going to release him at this time, but he can.
Okay. So apparently you're still going to be under the subpoena, but you're free to leave for the day.
Okay. So.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Still get your $400
Okay,
per
members
hour.
of the jury, given the time, I think it's going to be a good time for us to take a lunch break. Let me just think through the time for a second.
It was factitious disorder, is what he was talking about, CG. That was on the discharge paperwork.
Let's have
Basically
them ready to go
Maya
at
made it up.
1:15.
1:15.
Have a wonderful lunch. Do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not do any investigation and receive no information. We'll see you. Have a good lunch.
All rise. Jurors exit.
All rise, jurors exiting. The judge may try to handle a little bit of paperwork here before he leaves. He's got that 11:55 hard stop because he has a lunch that he's the chairperson of. It's like a judge's lunch or something. I'm not sure. Let's see if they try to get any paperwork done. And I don't think they
We'll be
will.
back at 1, but are there any issues we need to address before we go on break?
I'd just like to know, is it Dr. Kirkpatrick or Dr. Hollins?
Who's next? Dr. Kirkpatrick is next.
Okay. We'll see everybody at 1 o'clock.
Thank you, Judge.
Okay, so if they're back at 1, we're going to be back in 1 hour, which is 12:45. We'll get a full lunch break. And my wife is taking the kids to a thing in Raleigh, so I am on my own searching for lunch in the house. So wish me luck on that. It will probably be not one of those lunches you would take a picture of and post on Instagram. It's going to be like, well, there's some pickles, and I found some cheese, and there's a banana in the cupboard. And it's going to be one of those lunches. Pickles and Hot Pockets, says Ivan. That's about where we're headed. There's probably something in the freezer. I think we've got some egg rolls I could probably throw in the microwave and nuke up for me. I have to scavenge for lunch, but it'll happen. We'll survive. We'll get some sustenance. I think the doctor did a great job. Surprised he's earned a ton of money. I would say that amount of money going to an expert witness is on the high end that we see. Now, granted, he's got the resume to demand that sort of money, but $400 an hour. He's done 70 some odd hours. Sat in court all day yesterday, half a day today. $40,000 is a chunk of change. Which is, but I'm wondering if the plaintiff thought they got their money's worth out of him, especially considering all the areas that they were not allowed to go into that they hoped to. All right, hunting we will go. Yes, we're going to go look for some food. Ramen and egg rolls. We do have ramen. Yes, we've got ramen. I can do that, and I'm quite fond of ramen if you cook it correctly. They went early this morning. They've been gone for a while, so they'll be coming back during lunchtime. But I think it depends. I think they're trying to hit a museum this afternoon. Pickle and cheese sandwich it is. It's a lot less per hour than the $600 they paid to Anderson's psychologist friend. Yeah, but how many hours did he do? That's my question. $600 an hour might be high, but did he do 71 hours worth of work? That's a chunk of change. Man, it's expensive to sue people. It is confusing testimony, but factitious disorder is the new name for Munchausen, says Anna. Factitious disorder is the victim side, right? Isn't that what they tried to say? The factitious would be on Maya's end. It's a lot of hours. What's ramen? What's ramen? Ramen is the 10-cent dinner. That's what it is. It's just noodles that are probably full of chemicals and stuff that are very bad for you. You just add water and add a little seasoning, and it's you're ready to go. It's delicious. You can also fry up all sorts of stuff. You can make stir fry and mix ramen in. I'm not going to be doing that because that would take time and effort. I'm going to have to clean the clean the kitchen. Anyway, all right, we're going to wrap things up and go to lunch. We have just under an hour here to do that. So I appreciate everybody who's been here. This has been an exciting morning, very spicy. I think it's going to continue spicy. We have 2 more doctors that are going to try to fit in today. Was it Kirkpatrick that's up next? It'll be interesting. We'll see how they do this. There's been several rulings already about what they can and cannot go into, and so we'll see if doors get opened or if mistrials get called for. All of this could happen today. We're going to see. All right, thank you very much to everybody who is not going to be here on the second part of today's live stream. Please, tonight when you go home, hug the people you love, smile at someone, make their day just a little bit better, and please stay safe to go live again, which will be in about 1 hour, 57 minutes now. So we'll see you then. First person to chat, as always, wins the internet. It could be you. Click the subscribe button, ring the bell, and then just be first in chat. And you too could have that on your resume or rap sheet. Thanks to all the great mods who helped sort out the troll situation this morning. I don't know why. I want to just ask them, what did I do to you ever? Why come in here with that? Anyway, we'll get through it. Thank you all very much. We'll see you guys later. Have a good one.
Is that correct?
That was terrible. I apologize.
Are we going to address subject matter jurisdiction?